The 100th lash fell with the same terrible precision as the first. Blood no longer splattered from the woman's back. It merely seeped from wounds torn open again and again until they were beyond pain, beyond healing. The crowd gathered in the clearing by Hollow Creek stood silent now, their initial jeers replaced by a collective, heavy breathing that hung in the humid air like a prayer to a merciless God. Ezekiel Blackwood, mayor of Hollow Creek, stepped forward. At 60, he cut an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered despite his age, with a white beard trimmed to military precision and eyes cold as river stones in January. He wore his Sunday best, as if this were some holy occasion. Let this be a reminder, his voice carried across the clearing, of the price of defiance against God's natural order. Naomi Clark brought death upon her husband, my brother, through her barren curse. Now justice has been served. The woman, still bound to the whipping post, made no sound. Her dark hair, matted with blood and sweat, obscured her face, but something in the way she held herself, head unbowed, shoulders straight despite the flayed skin of her back, suggested a defiance that 100 lashes hadn't broken. Two men untied her, letting her crumple to the ground like discarded laundry. Mayor Blackwood nodded toward the river. Leave her by the water. Let the Lord decide if she lives or dies. The crowd dispersed slowly, some casting uncertain glances back at the broken woman, but none daring to help. They dragged her to the riverbank, depositing her on the muddy shore where the slow-moving water might wash away her blood or rise in the night to claim her entirely. By dusk, Hollow Creek returned to its regular rhythm. Shops closed, families gathered for supper, and no one spoke of the woman dying by the river. She became a ghost before she was even dead. Reuben Kane had no intention of riding near the river that evening. He stood on the ridge overlooking Hollow Creek Valley, Winchester rifle cradled in his arms, watching the town through his field glass. At 42, his face carried the weathered lines of a man who'd seen too much. The deep furrow between his brows a permanent reminder of the war that had taken his youth and the grief that had taken his wife. He'd been tracking a buck since dawn, hoping to bring home meat for his children. Food was scarce since they'd moved to this isolated stretch of land, away from the stifling whispers of redemption, the town they'd fled 3 months prior. Through his field glass, he'd witnessed the gathering at the creek, but distance had obscured the details. Only when the crowd dispersed did he make out the still form left behind. Something twisted in his gut, a sensation he'd known too well during the war, the feeling that told him men were dying nearby. Reuben lowered the glass, conflict etching deeper lines around his mouth. It wasn't his business. He had 3 children waiting at home, depending on him. Whatever justice or injustice was being played out in Hollow Creek, it wasn't his fight. But as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the valley, he found himself guiding his horse down the ridge toward the river. Some wounds he knew couldn't be left to fester. The woman lay exactly where they'd left her, half submerged in the muddy bank. From a distance, she might have been mistaken for a bundle of discarded clothes. Up close, the reality was far worse. Her dress, once blue, was now a tapestry of crimson and brown. Her back laid open to the bone in places. Reuben dismounted cautiously, scanning the area for watchers. Finding none, he crouched beside her, pressing fingers against her neck. A pulse fluttered weakly beneath his touch. Still alive, he muttered, surprised and somewhat impressed. He turned her gently, revealing a face younger than he expected, perhaps 30, with features that might have been beautiful before pain had hollowed her cheeks and darkened the skin beneath her eyes. Her eyelids fluttered, and he was startled by the clarity of her gray-blue gaze when she looked at him. Come to finish it? Her voice was a rasp, barely audible over the river's murmur. No, ma'am. He glanced again at her ruined back. Who did this to you? Justice, she whispered, or so they call it. Her left arm shifted slightly, and Reuben noticed something that made his breath catch, a distinctive circular scar on her wrist, the mark of a field nurse from the war where ropes had burned into skin during endless hours of hauling wounded men from battlefields. You served, he said, not a question, but a recognition. Antietam, she confirmed, her eyes growing distant. Gettysburg, Cold Harbor. Understanding passed between them, the unspoken language of those who had witnessed the same hell. Reuben had fought at Antietam, had nearly died there if not for nurses like her. What's your name? He asked. Naomi Clark. She attempted to move, winced. I didn't cry. Not once, wouldn't give them that. Reuben nodded, respect mingling with his concern. I'm Reuben Kane. Decision crystallized in his mind. He couldn't leave her. Not like this. Not when she wore the same scars of war he did. But taking her meant trouble, the kind that had followed him from redemption, the kind he'd promised his children was behind them. I have a place, he said carefully. It's not much, but there's clean water and bandages. She studied him, wariness evident despite her pain. Why help me? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Reuben had asked himself the same thing on the ride down. The answer came from a place he thought the war had burned out of him. Because it seems no one else will. It was enough. He gathered her into his arms, surprised at how little she weighed, and lifted her onto his horse. Her breath hissed between clenched teeth, but she made no other sound of complaint as he mounted behind her, supporting her weight against his chest. They rode in silence as twilight deepened into night, leaving the river and Hollow Creek behind. Reuben felt the warmth of her blood seeping through his shirt and wondered if she would survive the journey. More than that, he wondered what awaited both of them if she did. The cabin stood in a small clearing, surrounded by pine and oak, far enough from the main road that casual travelers wouldn't notice it. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a single lantern glowed in the window, his children keeping watch. As Reuben approached, the door flew open. Amos, his eldest at 14, stood framed in the doorway, shotgun held awkwardly in hands, still growing into a man's size. Pa? Uncertainty tinged his voice as he made out the second figure on the horse. Put that down before you shoot your foot off, Reuben said, dismounting carefully while supporting Naomi. Come help me. Amos approached warily, lowering the shotgun. His eyes widened at the sight of Naomi's bloodied form. Who is she? What happened? Questions later. Get the door. Inside, the cabin was warm and smelled of the stew that had been simmering all day. Ruth, 10 years old and still wearing the perpetual smile that somehow survived her mother's death, peeked around the corner. Her smile faltered at the sight of the blood-soaked stranger. Is she dead? Ruth whispered. No, child, Reuben said, laying Naomi carefully on his own bed. Fetch water and clean cloths. Amos, get my medicine kit from the shed. Hannah, 12 and silent since her mother's passing 3 years prior, stood in the shadows of the room, watching with solemn eyes that seemed to absorb everything. Without being told, she brought a blanket and laid it beside the bed. Reuben worked through the night, cleaning wounds, applying salves made from honey and herbs, wrapping bandages with the same methodical care he'd learned on battlefields. The children helped silently, Ruth bringing water, Amos holding lanterns, Hannah simply watching, learning. By dawn, Naomi's fever was rising, her breathing shallow and rapid. Reuben sat beside her, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead, listening to her delirious murmurs. James, the baby. I tried. God knows I tried. Reuben recognized the pattern, the same fevered confessions he'd heard from dying soldiers, the things they needed to say before crossing over. He listened, piecing together her fragmented story. James Clark, her husband, a Southern officer who'd fought for the Confederacy while she'd nursed Union soldiers. They'd found each other after the war, a union meant to heal old wounds. But her wartime injuries had left her barren, unable to give him the son he desperately wanted. He said, I was God's mistake, she whispered, during a moment of clarity, eyes fixed on Reuben's. Said a woman who couldn't bear children wasn't a woman at all. James had taken his own life 6 months prior, leaving her alone in a town ruled by his brother, Mayor Blackwood, who'd transformed her into a scapegoat for all the town's misfortunes. Reuben replaced the cloth on her forehead, his jaw tight. He recognized Blackwood's type, men who'd found power in the chaos after the war, who ruled through fear dressed up as moral authority. He'd confronted one such man in redemption, and it had cost him everything. A small hand touched his arm. Hannah stood beside him, her dark eyes questioning. She'd brought him coffee, the mug almost too big for her slender hands. She'll need time, he told his daughter, accepting his mug. But she's strong. Hannah nodded, a gesture so like her mother's that it made Reuben's chest tighten. She reached out hesitantly, touching Naomi's hand with gentle fingers. We don't talk about your mama enough, Reuben said suddenly. She would have done the same thing, helped this woman. Margaret always did what was right, not what was easy. Hannah's eyes filled with tears, the first emotion he had seen from her in months, and she nodded again before slipping away. Reuben returned his attention to Naomi, whose breathing had steadied somewhat. "You're going to live," he told her unconscious form. "I didn't drag you all this way to watch you die." Ruth burst into the cabin 2 days later, her usual exuberance tempered by fear. Reuben looked up from where he was changing Naomi's bandages, alarmed by his daughter's expression. "Riders coming," she gasped. "From town. Mayor Blackwood and 3 men. They're asking about a woman." Reuben's hand stilled. "How far?" "Just past the creek crossing. 5 minutes, maybe." He stood, decision made in an instant. "Amos, get your rifle. Stay with Miss Clark. Ruth, take Hannah to the root cellar and stay there until I call you." "What are you going to do?" Amos asked, reaching for the rifle above the mantel. Reuben checked his revolver, a Colt Army he'd carried since the war. "Going to have a conversation." He stepped onto the porch as 4 riders emerged from the tree line. Mayor Blackwood led them, flanked by a lean, hard-faced man Reuben didn't recognize, and 2 obvious hired guns, their eyes constantly scanning for threats. Reuben leaned against the porch post, his posture deliberately casual despite the revolver holstered at his hip. He didn't reach for it, not yet, but made sure they could see it. "Afternoon, gentlemen," he called as they approached. "You're a long way from town." Blackwood reined in his horse, studying Reuben with cold calculation. "You'd be Cain, the newcomer from Redemption." "That's right. I'm Ezekiel Blackwood, mayor of Hollow Creek." "I know who you are." Blackwood's beard twitched, the only indication that Reuben's tone had irritated him. "We're looking for a woman, dangerous woman, fled justice 2 days ago." "Justice?" Reuben raised an eyebrow. "Interesting word." The lean man beside Blackwood shifted in his saddle. "Watch your tone when addressing the mayor, stranger." "And you are?" "Wade Lockett, sheriff's deputy." Reuben nodded slowly, taking in the man's nervous energy, the way his fingers kept brushing the grip of his pistol. "A dangerous man, but not a confident one." "The woman," Blackwood continued, "is my responsibility. My brother's widow. She's unwell, harmed herself and others. We need to return her to proper care." "Haven't seen any women out this way," Reuben said. "Just me and my children." Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "You mind if we look around? For our peace of mind." "I do mind." Reuben straightened, hand resting casually near his holster. "Unless you have a warrant, this is private property." "You were a lawyer once, I hear," Blackwood said, his tone shifting to something almost amused. "Before the war, before Redemption." The mention of his past sent a cold ripple down Reuben's spine. Blackwood had been asking questions, never a good sign. That was another life. "Indeed," Blackwood smiled without warmth. "The war changed many of us, made some stronger, broke others. I understand you lost your wife. Tragic." The casual mention of Margaret made Reuben's fingers twitch. "State your business and move on, Mayor. My children are waiting." "Don't involve yourself in Hollow Creek's affairs, Cain," Blackwood said, dropping all pretense of civility. "I maintain the moral fabric of this community. The woman we seek is a curse, barren, godless, the cause of my brother's death. She's been judged accordingly." "By who? You?" "By God's law," Blackwood's voice rose, "which supersedes the corrupted statutes of men. I know your type, Cain. You think the war settled things, that the old ways are gone. But out here, we remember what's right." Reuben held the mayor's gaze. "I remember what's right, too. Seems we have different recollections." Lockett spat on the ground. "Just tell us if you've seen her." "Woman in her 30s, dark hair, probably half dead." "Haven't seen anyone fitting that description." Blackwood studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "Very well. But understand this. If you're harboring her, you're inviting her curse into your home, onto your children. Some sins can't be washed away, Cain. Remember that." They turned their horses, but Blackwood paused, looking back over his shoulder. "I heard about your troubles in Redemption, how you stood against the wrong people, lost everything. A shame to see history repeat itself." With that parting threat, they rode away, leaving Reuben standing on the porch, jaw clenched, tight enough to crack teeth. Inside, he found Amos standing by the bedroom door, rifle still clutched in white-knuckled hands. The boy's face was pale but determined. "I heard," Amos said. "They're looking for her." Reuben nodded, taking the rifle gently from his son's hands. "Go get your sisters." When the children were gathered in the main room, Reuben explained as much as he felt they could understand, that Naomi was in danger, that powerful men wanted to hurt her, that helping her might bring trouble to their door. "Like in Redemption?" Amos asked, his young face hardening with the memory of their hasty departure from the town they'd once called home. "Not like Redemption," Reuben said firmly. "I made mistakes there, moved too fast, trusted the wrong people. This is different." "How?" Amos challenged. "You're bringing someone else's fight to our home. Again." The accusation stung because it carried truth. In Redemption, Reuben had stood against the town's corrupt judge, exposing land schemes that had ruined dozens of families. He'd won the legal battle but lost everything else. Their home, their standing, nearly their lives. "Some fights find you," Reuben said finally, "and some fights you can't walk away from without losing something more important than safety." "Like what?" Ruth asked, her small face serious for once. Reuben looked at each of his children in turn. "Like knowing the difference between what's easy and what's right." Hannah, silent as always, moved to the bedroom door and looked in at Naomi. Then she turned to her father and nodded once, a gesture of approval that carried more weight than words. Amos wasn't convinced. "What are you going to do? We can't just hide her forever." "No," Reuben agreed, decision crystallizing. "We can't." He walked to his desk and pulled out paper, pen, and ink. His children watched as he began to write, his lawyer's hand forming precise, measured words. "What's that?" Ruth asked, peering over his arm. "A letter to Judge Montgomery in St. Louis, an old friend from before the war." Reuben continued writing. "I'm requesting a federal investigation into Mayor Blackwood and the governance of Hollow Creek." Amos's eyes widened. "You're going to fight the whole town? That's crazy, Pa." Reuben set down his pen, looking up at his son with steady resolve. "I'm not fighting the town, Amos. I'm fighting for the law. There's a difference." "They'll come for us," Amos insisted, "just like in Redemption. We'll lose everything again." "Maybe." Reuben's voice was quiet but firm. "But I've run once already, and it didn't solve anything. Some things you have to stand against, or you'll be running the rest of your life." He returned to his letter, aware of his children watching him, aware of the weight of his decision. From the bedroom came the sound of Naomi's labored breathing, a woman he barely knew, whose life now rested in his hands. The last light of day filtered through the cabin windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Outside, the first owl of evening called, a lonely sound that carried across the darkening valley. Reuben sealed his letter, knowing that once sent, there would be no turning back. They would stand or fall together, a broken family and a broken woman against the power of Hollow Creek. "God help us," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if God still listened to men like him. 3 days passed before Naomi Clark opened her eyes properly. The fever had broken during the second night, leaving her weak but lucid. She awoke to find a small figure perched on a stool beside the bed. Ruth, Reuben's youngest, threading a needle with intense concentration. "You're awake," Ruth exclaimed, nearly dropping her sewing. "Pa said you might not wake up at all, but I told him you would. I prayed extra hard." Naomi tried to speak, but her throat felt like she'd swallowed sand. Ruth immediately reached for a cup of water on the nightstand, holding it carefully to Naomi's lips. "Small sips," the girl instructed with the seriousness of a physician. "Pa says too much at once will make you sick again." Naomi obeyed, the cool water bringing tears to her eyes. When she could finally speak, her voice emerged as a rasp. "How long?" 3 days and 2 nights, Ruth replied, setting the cup down. "You talked a lot, even though you were sleeping. Pa said that's normal when someone's real sick." Naomi closed her eyes briefly, wondering what secrets she'd revealed in her delirium. "Your father, where is he?" "Hunting with Amos. Hannah's gathering eggs." Ruth leaned closer, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Pa says you were hurt by bad men." "Were they outlaws?" Before Naomi could answer, the cabin door opened. Hannah entered, carrying a basket of eggs. She froze when she saw Naomi awake, her solemn eyes widening. "It's all right," Naomi said gently. "I won't hurt you." Hannah approached cautiously, setting the basket on the table. Unlike Ruth's open curiosity, Hannah's gaze held something deeper. Recognition, perhaps, of another wounded soul. Hannah doesn't talk, Ruth explained matter-of-factly. Not since Mama died. Pa says her words are still inside, just waiting for the right time. Naomi nodded, holding Hannah's gaze. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. Something shifted in Hannah's expression, a slight softening around the eyes, an almost imperceptible nod. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small object, placing it on the bedside table before retreating to the kitchen area. It was a tiny wooden bird, roughly carved but recognizable as a sparrow. A gift, Naomi realized, or perhaps a message. She made that, Ruth said proudly. Hannah makes birds for important things. She made one when we left redemption and one for Mama's grave. Before Naomi could respond, heavy boots sounded on the porch. Ruth scrambled from her stool. That's Pa and Amos. They got a deer yesterday. Reuben entered first, his tall frame filling the doorway. He stopped when he saw Naomi awake, relief briefly softening the hard lines of his face. Welcome back to the land of the living, he said, setting his rifle against the wall. Amos followed, carrying a brace of rabbits. At 14, he had his father's height, but none of his ease. All awkward limbs and wary eyes that narrowed when he saw Naomi. She's awake, he said flatly, as if announcing a problem rather than a recovery. I can see that, Reuben replied, removing his hat and coat. How are you feeling, Ms. Clark? Alive, Naomi said. Thanks to you. Reuben nodded, then turned to his children. Amos, clean those rabbits. Ruth, help your brother. Hannah, would you check the bandages on Ms. Clark's back? The children dispersed to their tasks, leaving an awkward silence between the adults. Reuben poured himself a cup of coffee, then sat at the small table near the bed. You had us worried, he said simply. Fever wouldn't break. I'm sorry for the trouble. No trouble, just glad you pulled through. He sipped his coffee, studying her over the rim. Blackwood came looking for you. Naomi's hand tightened on the blanket. What did you tell him? That I hadn't seen anyone. Technically true at the time. You were unconscious. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, then faded. He'll be back. Ezekiel doesn't forgive, and he never forgets. You know him well? Too well. She shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at her healing wounds. He was my brother-in-law, my husband's older brother. Reuben leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. During your fever, you mentioned your husband. James, was it? Naomi's gaze drifted to the window where afternoon light filtered through the trees. Yes, Captain James Clark of the 8th Virginia Infantry, Confederate. And you were a Union nurse. She met his eyes again. The war made strange bedfellows, Mr. Kane. We met after Appomattox when I was tending wounded prisoners. He was different then, broken by what he'd seen, what he'd done. We thought we could heal each other. Hannah approached with fresh bandages, her small hands gentle as she helped Naomi sit up. Reuben respectfully looked away while his daughter changed the dressings. The war left me barren, Naomi continued quietly, her voice steady despite the pain of movement. Shrapnel at Cold Harbor. I didn't know until after we were married. James wanted children. Needed them, he said, to replace all he'd destroyed. No man has the right to blame a woman for wounds gained in service, Reuben said, his voice hardening. In Hollow Creek, a woman's worth is measured by her ability to bear children. When I couldn't, she shook her head. James began drinking, listening to Ezekiel, who'd always thought I was beneath his brother. 6 months ago, James shot himself in our barn. Hannah's hands stilled momentarily at this revelation, then continued their careful work. Ezekiel blamed me publicly, said I'd driven James to it with my curse, said the town's recent misfortunes, drought, sickness, were God's judgment for harboring a barren woman who'd caused her husband's death. Reuben's jaw tightened, and they believed him. People believe what powerful men tell them to believe, Mr. Kane, especially when those men control their debts, their land, their future. Hannah finished with the bandages and stepped away, collecting the old dressings. Naomi nodded her thanks before continuing. 2 days ago, or 5 now, I suppose, a child died of fever, the Lockett boy. Ezekiel said it was my influence, my curse spreading. He called for a cleansing. Her voice remained steady, but her hands trembled slightly. 100 lashes, then exile or death, the town's choice. And no one stood against him? Reuben asked, his voice low with controlled anger. One man, Pastor Johnson. He said it wasn't God's way. Ezekiel had him removed from the church. Naomi's eyes met Reuben's directly. Hollow Creek isn't a town anymore, Mr. Kane. It's Ezekiel's kingdom. Reuben stood, walking to the window. The valley stretched below, Hollow Creek a distant cluster of buildings in the afternoon haze. I've seen his kind before, he said, in the war and after. Men who use God's name to justify their own power. Men who twist justice into vengeance. You can't fight him, Naomi said. When I'm stronger, I'll go. Head west, perhaps. I won't bring his wrath down on your family. Reuben turned, his expression resolute. I've already taken steps. Sent a letter to Federal Judge Montgomery in St. Louis, requesting an investigation. Naomi's eyes widened. You did what? What needed to be done? What should have been done long ago? You don't understand. Ezekiel has connections, powerful ones. Politicians, army officers, the war made him rich. I understand perfectly, Reuben said. I faced a man like him in redemption. Judge Hargrove. He was stealing land from war widows, manipulating property records. I exposed him, brought a case against him. What happened? A shadow crossed Reuben's face. I won the case. Lost everything else. Our home was burned. Margaret, my wife, she'd been ill, the consumption. The night we had to flee. The cold, the stress. He shook his head. We buried her in a stranger's town. Naomi's expression softened with understanding. I'm sorry. I learned my lesson. This time we do it right. Legal, official, through proper channels. Hannah had returned to the kitchen, but Naomi could tell she was listening. The girl's shoulders were tense, her movements too precise as she prepared vegetables for dinner. Your children have already lost too much, Naomi said quietly. Don't make them lose their father too. Reuben's eyes hardened. I'm doing this for them, so they'll know some things are worth fighting for, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Before Naomi could respond, Amos burst through the door, his young face pale with alarm. Riders coming, he said, not Blackwood. Different men, 6 of them, armed. Reuben moved immediately, grabbing his rifle. Get your sisters to the cellar. Miss Clark, can you move? Naomi pushed herself upright, ignoring the fire across her back. I can manage. Good, hide with the children. He checked his ammunition, voice steady despite the danger. If anything happens to me, there's money in the false bottom of the flour barrel. Enough to get you all to St. Louis. Pa, Amos began, but Reuben cut him off. No arguments. Protect your sisters. That's your job now. The boy hesitated, then nodded, helping Naomi to her feet while Ruth and Hannah gathered in the main room. Mr. Kane, Naomi said, her voice low enough that only he could hear. Don't die for my sake. These children need you. Reuben's expression softened momentarily. I don't plan on dying today, Miss Clark. Just having a conversation. As Amos led Naomi and his sisters toward the root cellar, Reuben stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready. The approaching riders were still distant dots on the winding trail up from the valley. In the dim confines of the cellar, Naomi sat with the children, listening to the muffled sounds of hoofbeats growing louder. Ruth pressed against her side, small face pinched with worry. Hannah sat perfectly still, eyes fixed on the trapdoor above. Amos gripped a hunting knife, the only weapon Reuben had allowed him to take. Your father's a good man, Naomi whispered to them. Brave, like you. He's a fool, Amos said bitterly, just like in Redemption, always fighting other people's battles. Naomi studied the boy's face, recognizing the fear beneath his anger. Sometimes the only battles worth fighting are the ones that aren't your own. Above them, horses arrived, men's voices, too muffled to make out words. Then clearly Reuben's voice, state your business and be on your way. More muffled conversation, a laugh, harsh, unfriendly. Then silence. Ruth's small hand found Naomi's, squeezing tight. Will they hurt Pa? Before Naomi could answer, a gunshot cracked the air. The 6 riders were not what Reuben had expected. Not Blackwood's men from town, but rougher types, Trail-worn, hard-faced men with the watchful eyes of predators. Their leader, a gray-haired man with a cavalry mustache, reined in his horse at the edge of the clearing. "This Kane's place?" he called, his accent marking him as Texan. "I'm Reuben Kane," Reuben answered, not moving from the porch. "What's your business?" The man dismounted, leaving his rifle in its saddle holster, a gesture that might have seemed peaceful if not for the revolver still prominently displayed on his hip. "Name's Silas McCready. These are my associates." He gestured vaguely to the men behind him. "We're looking for a woman, heard she might be in these parts." Reuben's grip tightened imperceptibly on his rifle. "Lot of women in the territory. You'll have to be more specific." McCready smiled thinly. "This one's special. Dark hair, pretty face, when it ain't all beat to hell. Name's Naomi Clark." "Don't know her." "That's so?" McCready glanced meaningfully at the second horse in Reuben's small corral. "2 horses for 1 man seems excessive, unless you got company." "My son rides, we hunt." McCready took a step forward, then another, testing in boundaries. "See, the thing is, Mr. Kane, we were hired special to find this woman. Good money, too. Mayor Blackwood seems real concerned about her whereabouts." "Can't help you." McCready's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We ain't even searched your place yet. Might be worth a look." "Not without a warrant." Reuben raised his rifle slightly, not aiming, but ready. "This is private property. I'm asking you to leave." The other men tensed, hands moving toward weapons. McCready held up a hand, stopping them. "Now, Mr. Kane, no need for unpleasantness. We're just doing a job." "So am I," Reuben said, "protecting my home and my children." McCready's eyes narrowed. "Children, eh? Shame if anything happened to them. World's a dangerous place for little ones without a father." The threat hung in the air like gun smoke. Reuben's finger moved to the trigger, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "That sounds remarkably like a threat, Mr. McCready. I don't take kindly to threats against my family." "Just making conversation." McCready backed up a step, sensing he'd pushed too far. "Tell you what, we'll ride on for now, but this matter ain't settled. Blackwood's offering $50 for information on the woman, 100 for bringing her in. That kind of money makes for persistent men." "I'll bear that in mind." McCready remounted, tipping his hat with mock politeness. "Good day, Mr. Kane. Give my regards to your children." As they turned to leave, one of the riders, younger than the rest, with a patchy beard and nervous eyes, suddenly drew his pistol. Whether from nerves or malice, the gun discharged, the bullet splintering wood near Reuben's head. Reuben fired in response, his shot striking the young rider in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. The others reached for weapons, but McCready barked an order. "Hold! Damn it, Jefferson, holster that gun!" He glared at the fallen rider, who clutched his bleeding shoulder. "That's coming out of your share, you trigger-happy fool." To Reuben he called, "Just a misunderstanding. Boys knew." "Get him and get out," Reuben replied, rifle still raised. "Don't come back." 2 of the men dismounted to help their wounded companion. As they lifted him onto his horse, McCready fixed Reuben with a calculating look. "You're good with that rifle. Military man?" "Once." "Which side?" "The winning side." McCready's lips twitched in what might have been amusement or irritation. "Ain't we all on the winning side now? One nation, under God." Seems some folks missed that sermon. With a final assessing gaze, McCready led his men away. The wounded rider slumped over his saddle. Reuben waited until they were well out of sight before lowering his rifle. The encounter left him uneasy. Hired guns meant Blackwood was serious, and that he had resources beyond what a small-town mayor should command. He returned inside to find Amos emerging from the cellar, knife in hand, followed by the women. "I heard a shot," Amos said, eyes searching his father for injury. "Minor disagreement," Reuben replied, setting his rifle aside. "Everyone's fine." "Who were they?" Naomi asked, her face pale with the strain of climbing from the cellar. "Bounty hunters. Blackwood's hiring outside help." Ruth clung to Hannah's hand, her usual exuberance subdued by fear. "Are they coming back, Pa?" Reuben knelt to his daughter's level, forcing a reassuring smile. "Not today. And we'll be ready if they do." "You shot one of them," Amos said, not a question, but an accusation. "Wing shot. He'll live to make poor decisions another day." Naomi sank into a chair, her strength clearly waning. I should leave, tonight. This will only escalate. You're not strong enough, Reuben said, and it wouldn't solve anything. They'd just track you down without the inconvenience of having to deal with me first. Then what's your plan? Amos demanded. Wait for more men with guns to show up? Hope your letter reaches some judge who might not even care? Reuben studied his son, seeing not just anger, but genuine fear. The boy had already lost too much, carried too many burdens for his age. No, he said finally, we're not waiting anymore. Tomorrow I'm going to Hollow Creek. 4 voices protested simultaneously, but Reuben raised a hand for silence. Not to fight, to gather information, to find allies. Every tyrant has enemies, people who have been hurt, who hold grudges, who know secrets. He looked at Naomi. I need to know exactly what we're dealing with. I'll go with you, she said. Absolutely not. You're still healing, and you're the one they're hunting. Precisely why I should go. I know Hollow Creek know its people. I know who might help, who might be persuaded. Her gaze was steady, determined, and I won't hide while you risk yourself for me. It's too dangerous. More dangerous to go in blind. She leaned forward, wincing slightly. Ezekiel has this town terrified, Mr. Kane. But terror creates resentment, and resentment creates opportunities. Reuben considered this, then nodded slowly. We'll need to disguise you. I can help with that, Ruth offered eagerly, tension breaking. I'm good at braiding hair. And I need you 3 to stay here, Reuben told his children. Keep the rifle loaded, bar the doors after dark. Amos is in charge. The boy straightened at this responsibility, though worry still creased his young brow. What if those men come back? They won't, not tomorrow at least. Their friend needs time to heal, and they'll report back to Blackwood first. Reuben squeezed his son's shoulder. But if anyone comes, you hide. No heroics. As the family prepared dinner, Reuben pulled Naomi aside. There's something you're not telling me about Blackwood, isn't there? Something beyond his treatment of you. She hesitated, then nodded. Ezekiel isn't just cruel, Mr. Kane. He's dangerous in ways you don't yet understand. Then help me understand. Naomi glanced at the children, lowering her voice. During the war, before I married James, I was stationed at a field hospital near Fredericksburg. Ezekiel was a colonel then, in charge of prisoner exchanges. There were rumors, Confederate prisoners who never arrived, Union soldiers who disappeared during transport. Deserters happen in war. These weren't deserters. These were planned disappearances. Soldiers with wealthy families, ransomed privately. Her eyes held his. I saw documents, orders bearing Ezekiel's signature, routing prisoners away from official exchanges. Reuben's expression darkened. That's not just a crime, that's treason. Yes, and after the war, those same skills, intimidation, extortion, served him well. He bought up debt all through the county, foreclosed on farms, consolidated power. She shook her head. James knew some of it, not all. I think when he finally understood the extent of his brother's crimes, he couldn't live with the knowledge. And Blackwood knows, you know. He suspects. It's why the punishment was so severe, why he's so determined to find me. I'm not just a convenient scapegoat. I'm a threat. Reuben absorbed this, mind working. We need proof, documents, witnesses. There may be some. Pastor Johnson might know more. He hears confessions, sees things. And Sarah Winters, Ezekiel's housekeeper. She's been with the family for years. Then those are our first stops. Reuben glanced toward the window where darkness was falling across the valley. Tomorrow we find out exactly what kind of man we're dealing with. I already know what kind of man he is, Naomi said quietly. The question is whether he can be stopped. Dawn broke cold and misty over Hollow Creek Valley. Reuben and Naomi set out early, leaving the children with strict instructions to bar the doors and stay hidden. Naomi rode side saddle, dressed in Hannah's Sunday dress in one of Margaret's old bonnets, her dark hair braided and pinned beneath it. A heavy shawl covered her heeling back. From a distance, she might pass for any farmer's wife. They approached Hollow Creek from the south, avoiding the main road where Blackwood's men might be watching. The town was larger than Reuben had expected, 30 or 40 buildings clustered around a central square, with a white steepled church dominating one end and an imposing 2-story house at the other. Blackwood's residence, Naomi murmured, nodding toward the house, built with Confederate government funds meant for widows' pensions. They tethered their horses behind the livery stable and entered town on foot, heads down, moving with purpose but not haste. Few people were about in the early morning, a shopkeeper sweeping his porch, two women drawing water at the town pump. Reuben felt eyes tracking them, but couldn't tell if it was suspicion or merely the natural curiosity small towns held for strangers. The church stood silent, doors closed despite the early hour. Naomi led them around to a small cottage behind it, knocking softly on the back door. After a long moment, it opened a crack, revealing an elderly man's face, lined with worry and lack of sleep. "Yes?" he asked, then froze as he recognized Naomi. "Dear God, may we come in, Pastor?" she asked quietly. "Please." He glanced fearfully over their shoulders, then nodded, opening the door just wide enough for them to slip through before closing and bolting it. Inside, the cottage was Spartan but neat. Books lined one wall, a small writing desk occupied another. Pastor Johnson, thin, stooped, with kind eyes at odds with his fearful demeanor, gestured them to sit. "They said you were dead," he whispered to Naomi, "left by the river." "Nearly was," she replied. "This is Reuben Kane. He saved my life." Johnson studied Reuben with cautious assessment. "The newcomer from the ridge. There's been talk." "I imagine there has," Reuben said. "We need information, Pastor, about Blackwood, about what's happening in this town." Johnson sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 70-odd years. "What's happening is tyranny dressed as righteousness, Mr. Kane. Ezekiel Blackwood has turned God's word into a weapon." "Tell me about the Locketts," Naomi urged. "About their boy." Pain crossed the pastor's face. "Wade Lockett's son, Samuel, just 5 years old. Fever took him quick. Wade's wife, Abigail, died 2 years ago, her own hand. Wade was destroyed by it, turned to Blackwood for guidance. And Blackwood turned him against me," Naomi said. "Blackwood needs enemies to maintain control," Johnson said. "When you came to town, married James, an outsider, educated, questioning, you became a threat. When you couldn't bear children, you became a target. When James died, you became the perfect scapegoat." Reuben leaned forward. "Pastor, we need evidence of Blackwood's crimes. Real evidence that would stand in a federal court." Johnson hesitated, then rose, moving to his desk. From a hidden compartment, he withdrew a small leather journal. "I've kept records," he said, voice dropping further. "Dates, names, incidents, foreclosures that didn't follow legal process. Beatings of those who questioned him. 2 deaths that were called accidents, but weren't." Reuben took the journal, opening it to find page after page of neat, precise handwriting. Dates, facts, witnesses listed methodically. "This is exactly what we need," he said, "but it puts you in danger." "I'm an old man, Mr. Kane. I've been silent too long, watched evil grow under the guise of order." Johnson's hands trembled slightly. "But this isn't enough. You need financial records, proof of his wartime activities." "Where would we find those?" Naomi asked. "His study, most likely. Locked cabinet behind his desk. Sarah might help you. She cleans his office, has access to keys." "Is she trustworthy?" A shadow crossed Johnson's face. "Sarah Winters has her own reasons to hate Ezekiel Blackwood. Her daughter was one of Abigail Lockett's friends. Both dead now, both by their own hand, both after encounters with Blackwood." Naomi's expression hardened with understanding. "He forced himself on them." "I have no proof," Johnson said. "Only suspicions, confessions I cannot repeat. But yes, I believe so." Reuben closed the journal, tucking it inside his coat. "We need to speak with Sarah and with Wade Lockett." "Lockett won't help you," Johnson warned. "He's too far under Blackwood's influence. Believes everything the mayor tells him." "Then we start with Sarah." Reuben stood. "Thank you, Pastor. You've taken a great risk." "God's justice comes for all men eventually, Mr. Kane." Johnson's eyes were sad but determined. "Sometimes we must be its instruments." As they prepared to leave, a sudden commotion erupted outside. Shouts, running feet, the pounding of horses' hooves. Johnson moved to the window, peering through the curtains. His face paled. "Blackwood's men, searching the town. Someone must have recognized you." Reuben drew his revolver. Is there another way out? Root cellar connects to the church basement. Johnson moved a rug, revealing a trap door. Hurry. As he lifted the door, a pounding came at the front of the cottage. Pastor, open up, mayor's orders. Naomi and Reuben descended quickly into the darkness, Johnson following with a small lamp. The space was cramped, damp with earth and age. A narrow tunnel, shored with timber, led toward the church. Go, Johnson whispered. Find Sarah at Blackwood's house. Tell her pastor sent you. She'll understand. The pounding grew more insistent. Wood splintered as someone began forcing the door. What about you? Naomi asked. I'll delay them. Go with God. Before they could protest, Johnson ascended, closing the trap door and dragging the rug back into place above them. They heard his footsteps cross the floor, the front door opening, Johnson's voice raised in indignant protest. What is the meaning of this intrusion on God's property? Then Wade Lockett's voice, hard with authority. Where are they, old man? The woman and the stranger? I don't know what you're talking about. I've been alone all morning preparing Sunday's sermon. A slap echoed, followed by the sound of someone falling. Reuben's hand tightened on his gun, but Naomi gripped his arm, shaking her head in warning. Search the place, Lockett ordered. Tear it apart if you have to. Boots tramped overhead, furniture scraped across floors. Reuben and Naomi retreated into the tunnel, moving as silently as possible toward the church. Behind them, a cry of pain, Johnson's voice, then Lockett again. Last chance, Pastor. Where did they go? May God forgive you, Wade, came the reply. As I do. A gunshot cracked through the air, echoing even in the underground passage. Naomi stifled a gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Reuben pulled her deeper into the tunnel, heart pounding. They continued forward, guided only by the dim glow of Johnson's lamp, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. The tunnel widened into the church basement, a low-ceilinged room filled with stored pews and religious paraphernalia. Reuben found a narrow staircase leading up to the church proper. We can't go that way, Naomi whispered. They'll have men watching the church. We need to get out of town, Reuben said, back to the children. Not without seeing Sarah, not after what Johnson sacrificed. Reuben wanted to argue but knew she was right. Johnson's death, for surely the pastor was dead, would be meaningless if they fled now. Blackwood's house then, quickly, while they're searching the church. They found a side door leading to a small cemetery behind the church. Keeping to the shadows of gravestones and trees, they made their way toward the imposing house at the end of the square. As they approached, Reuben realized the gravity of their situation. Pastor Johnson dead. Blackwood's men searching the town, their horses likely discovered by now, and 3 children waiting alone at a cabin that might no longer be safe. We get what we need, he told Naomi, and then we run. Not back to the cabin, they'll look there first. We'll head straight for the territorial border. Naomi nodded, her face set with determination despite the fear in her eyes. Together. They slipped on around to the servants' entrance of Blackwood's house, finding it unguarded in the chaos of the manhunt. The back door opened to their knock, revealing a middle-aged woman with careworn features and suspicious eyes. Sarah Winters? Naomi asked quietly. The woman's eyes widened in recognition. You're supposed to be dead. Pastor Johnson sent us, Reuben said. He said you'd help. Something shifted in Sarah's expression. Grief mingled with resolve. They killed him, didn't they? Neither answered, but their silence was confirmation enough. Come in, Sarah said, opening the door wider. Quickly, before they return. They stepped into the kitchen, the door closing behind them with the finality of a coffin lid. Outside, the sounds of pursuit continued. Men calling to each other, horses galloping down the street. Inside Blackwood's house, the hunt would end, one way or another. Sarah Winters led them through the kitchen and up a narrow servants' staircase, her movements quick but cautious. The main part of Blackwood's house was silent, the mayor apparently out with his men, hunting for the very people now infiltrating his home. Mr. Blackwood keeps his papers in the study, Sarah whispered, pausing at the top of the stairs. Locked cabinet behind the desk. I clean in there every morning, only time I'm allowed in. He doesn't know I have a copy of the key. She withdrew a small brass key from her apron pocket, pressing it into Naomi's hand. This opens the cabinet. The documents you want will be in the red leather folder. He consults it often, especially when drinking. Thank you, Naomi said, squeezing the woman's hand. I'm sorry about your daughter. Pain flickered across Sarah's weathered face. Elizabeth was only 17. After what he did to her, she couldn't live with the shame. Her voice hardened. I've been waiting 3 years for a chance at justice. We'll make sure he pays, Reuben promised. For Elizabeth, for Johnson, for all of them. Sarah nodded, then gestured down the hallway. Third door on the right. I'll watch from the front windows, warn you if they return. The study was exactly as might be expected of a man like Blackwood. Ostentatious, designed to impress and intimidate. Heavy mahogany furniture, expensive carpets, walls lined with books that Reuben suspected had never been read. A large portrait of Blackwood in his Confederate colonel's uniform dominated one wall, his cold eyes following them across the room. He was never a colonel, Naomi murmured, noticing Reuben's gaze on the painting. Major was his highest rank, the rest is vanity. Reuben moved to the cabinet behind the desk, using Sarah's key to unlock it. Inside, leather folders were arranged with military precision. Financial records, property deeds, correspondence. The red folder was exactly where Sarah had indicated. Reuben pulled it out, opening it on the desk. My God, he breathed, paging through the documents inside. Names, dates, amounts. Confederate prisoners lost in transport, with corresponding payments from wealthy Southern families. Union officers diverted from prisoner exchanges, with notations of ransom demands. Bank accounts in New York, Chicago, even London. Property acquisitions throughout the county, many dated immediately after the war when land values had collapsed. He kept records of everything, Naomi said, disbelieving. Every crime, every transaction. Men like Blackwood don't think they'll ever be held accountable, Reuben replied, continuing to examine the documents. They keep records out of pride, as proof of their cleverness. One paper caught his attention, a list of names under the heading, Confidential Assets. Wade Lockett was there, along with the sheriff, several prominent townspeople, and names Reuben didn't recognize, presumably from neighboring communities. Beside each name were notations, debts, family, incident. His leverage, Reuben murmured, how he controls people. He turned the page and froze. There in Blackwood's meticulous handwriting was his own name. Reuben Kane, redemption scandal, wife's death, children vulnerable. He's been investigating you, Naomi said, reading over his shoulder, since before we met. Reuben's mind raced. He must have connections in redemption, been watching me since I arrived in the territory. But why? You were no threat to him until now. Reuben turned another page and the answer became clear. A letter from Judge Hargrove of redemption to Blackwood, dated 2 months earlier. Regarding the troublemaker Kane, he exposed operations here that mirror your own. Dangerous man, persistent, principled. Recommend neutralizing threat before he establishes himself. Family is his weakness, lost wife to consumption after our previous attempt to discourage his interference. 3 children remain. Cold fury settled in Reuben's chatham. Hargrove and Blackwood are partners. Land schemes, extortion, using the chaos after the war to build their empires. Then you were never safe, Naomi realized. Even before you found me, you were already a target. Reuben gathered the most damning documents, tucking them inside his coat alongside Johnson's journal. We need to get back to the children. Now. A soft knock at the door preceded Sarah's worried face. Riders returning, she whispered. Blackwood with them, 3 minutes at most. Is there another way out? Reuben asked, closing the cabinet. Window at the end of the hall leads to the side porch roof. You can drop to the garden from there. They followed her into the hallway, moving swiftly toward the window. Below, they could hear the front door opening, men's voices in the foyer. Search every building again, Blackwood was saying, his voice carrying clearly. They can't have left town, not with the roads watched. Sarah helped them open the window. Go, she urged. I'll close this behind you. Come with us, Naomi said suddenly. He'll know someone helped us. Sarah shook her head. My place is here, watching him, gathering evidence. Besides, I have nowhere else to go. Hoofbeats in the street outside indicated more riders arriving. Time was running out. Reuben climbed through the window first, helping Naomi onto the sloping porch roof. Her movements were stiff, her healing wounds clearly paining her, but she made no complaint. "Godspeed," Sarah whispered, closing the window behind them. They crossed the roof carefully, reaching the edge above a small kitchen garden. The drop was only about 8 feet, but Reuben worried about Naomi's injuries. He lowered himself first, then helped her down, supporting her weight as she winced in pain. From inside the house came a sudden shout, then the sound of breaking glass. They'd been discovered. "Run!" Reuben urged, drawing his revolver. They fled through the garden, keeping to the shadows of trees and outbuildings. Behind them, men poured from Blackwood's house. A gunshot cracked, the bullet splintering bark from a tree beside them. "There, by the woodshed!" someone shouted. Reuben fired back, not aiming to hit but to slow the pursuit. They reached the edge of town, where forest began to encroach on civilization. No sign of their horses, seized or scattered most likely. "We'll have to go on foot," Reuben said, guiding Naomi into the trees. "Follow the ridgeline back toward the cabin." They moved as quickly as Naomi's condition allowed, using the forest for cover. Behind them, hounds bayed. Blackwood was bringing dogs into the hunt. "They'll track us straight to the children," Naomi gasped, clutching her side. Reuben stopped, thinking rapidly. "We need to split up. I'll lead them away, double back to the cabin from the north." "No," Naomi's voice was firm despite her pain. "We stay together. If we both go to the cabin, we're leading Blackwood straight to my children. And if we split up, he'll capture one of us for certain." Reuben knew she was right, but couldn't see another option. The baying of hounds grew closer. Suddenly, hoofbeats approached from ahead, riders moving fast through the trees. Reuben pulled Naomi behind a fallen log, raising his revolver. 3 horses burst into view, and Reuben nearly fired before recognizing the lead rider. "Pa!" Amos called, reining in his horse. Behind him rode a man Reuben didn't recognize, leading a 3rd horse. "Amos!" Reuben stood, shock and anger warring in his voice. "What the hell are you doing here? Where are your sisters?" "Safe," Amos said, sliding from his saddle. "Mr. Parker has them." The stranger nodded, a weathered man in his 50s with the unmistakable bearing of a soldier. "Josiah Parker," he introduced himself. "Got your letter about Blackwood. Thought you might need help sooner rather than later." "Judge Montgomery sent you?" "Not exactly. I'm here unofficially. The judge is gathering evidence for a federal case, but these things take time." Parker's eyes narrowed as dogs bayed in the distance. "Time you don't have, apparently." Reuben helped Naomi mount the spare horse, then turned to his son. "You directly disobeyed me, Amos." The boy lifted his chin defiantly. "Hannah saw riders heading toward our place. We couldn't stay there." "So you rode straight into danger instead?" "We went to the old mining cabin first, like you showed us. Mr. Parker found us there." Amos's defiance faltered. "I couldn't just hide, Pa, not again. Not like in Redemption." Reuben wanted to be angry, but pride won out. He squeezed his son's shoulder. "We'll discuss this later. For now, let's outrun those hounds." They rode hard, following Parker's lead. The man clearly knew the territory, guiding them along game trails and shallow streams to confuse the dogs. "Your daughters are at my camp," Parker explained as they rode, 2 miles north of the territorial border. "My partner's with them, Daniel Redhawk, Lakota Scout, best tracker in 3 territories." "How did you find us?" Naomi asked. "Been watching Hollow Creek for a week. Saw the commotion this morning. Figured someone finally stood up to Blackwood." Parker glanced back at them. "Didn't expect it to be a half-dead woman and a widower with 3 kids." "Sometimes justice finds unlikely champions," Reuben replied. Parker snorted. "Justice needs more than champions, friend. It needs evidence, witnesses, and a judge willing to listen." "We have evidence," Reuben patted his coat where the documents were hidden, "and we'll find witnesses." "Good, because Ezekiel Blackwood isn't just some corrupt small-town mayor. He's connected. Politicians in Washington, railroad men, former Confederate officers now running legitimate businesses." Parker's voice hardened. Men who'd prefer their wartime activities remain buried. They rode until dusk, the sounds of pursuit gradually fading behind them. Parker led them to a stream where they watered the horses and rested briefly. "Why are you helping us?" Naomi asked him directly. "You said you were not here officially." Parker studied her for a moment before answering. "I served under General Grant. After Appomattox, I joined the Freedmen's Bureau, helping former slaves establish themselves. Saw firsthand how men like Blackwood perverted Reconstruction, turning freedom into a new kind of bondage through debt and intimidation. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a jagged scar running from wrist to elbow. Got this courtesy of a former Confederate captain who didn't appreciate my work. Captain James Clark. Naomi's breath caught. My husband. I figured as much when I heard your name. Parker's expression was unreadable. James Clark was a complicated man. Cruel in war, tormented after. I hated him for years. Then I learned he took his own life and found I couldn't hate a man who'd already judged himself more harshly than I ever could. Naomi looked away, her voice soft. He was a different man when I married him. Gentle sometimes. Haunted always. War changes men, Parker said. Some for better, most for worse. What about Blackwood? Reuben asked. What do you know about him? Ezekiel Blackwood was profiteering before the war, during it, and has continued since. Started with cotton smuggling, moved to prisoner ransoms, now it's land and political influence. Parker spat into the stream. Men died while he got rich. Good men on both sides. Amos, who had been quietly tending the horses, joined them. Will he come after us across the border? Count on it, Parker replied. Territorial lines don't mean much to men like Blackwood. But we'll reach my camp before midnight. We'll be safer there, plan our next move. As they prepared to continue, Naomi stumbled, nearly falling. Reuben caught her, alarmed by the heat radiating from her skin. You're feverish, he said, touching her forehead. I'm fine, she insisted, but her eyes were too bright, her breathing too rapid. Her wounds are infected, Parker observed. She needs a doctor. There's a town near your camp? Small trading post, has a surgeon, former army, not gentle but competent. Reuben helped Naomi back onto her horse, mounting behind her to support her increasingly limp form. Hold on, he murmured. Just a few more hours. They rode into deepening darkness, the moon providing just enough light to follow the trail. Naomi leaned heavily against Reuben's chest, her consciousness seeming to fade in and out. Tell me about your children, she murmured during a lucid moment. To keep me awake. Reuben tightened his arm around her waist, supporting her mouth. Amos, you know, stubborn as his mother, too serious for his age. Took on the weight of the world when Margaret died. And Hannah, why doesn't she speak? She was with Margaret at the end. Heard things, saw things a child shouldn't. Reuben's voice roughened with memory. Doctor said the shock stole her voice, that it might return when she feels safe again. She's lucky to have you, Naomi said softly. All of them are. I've dragged them from town to town, always running from something, some father. You've taught them what matters, standing for what's right, even when it costs you. Reuben was silent for a moment. And Ruth, she's sunshine, doesn't remember her mother much, but somehow keeps Margaret's spirit alive, believes the best of everyone. Like you, Naomi said, her voice fading. No, I stopped believing the best of people a long time ago. Yet you saved me, a stranger. Before Reuben could respond, Parker called back to them. Camp's just ahead. We'll rest there tonight, ride for the trading post at dawn. The camp was well concealed in a stand of pine trees, 3 canvas tents arranged around a small, shielded fire. As they approached, a tall, broad-shouldered man emerged from the shadows, rifle ready. It's us, Daniel, Parker called softly. Daniel Redhawk lowered his weapon, nodding in greeting. He wore a mixture of white and native clothing, buckskin pants, cavalry boots, a blue work shirt. His long hair was braided, his face weathered by sun and wind. The children are asleep, he said, his deep voice carrying a slight accent. No sign of pursuit. Pa! Ruth's voice came from one of the tents. She burst out, running to Reuben as he dismounted. Hannah followed more slowly, her solemn eyes taking in her father's exhausted state and Naomi's worst condition. Reuben embraced his daughters, holding them tightly. You're safe, both of you. We were so scared, Ruth said, her words muffled against his coat. Men came to the cabin, but we were already gone. Amos made us hide in the rocks until Mr. Parker found us. Hannah tugged at Reuben's sleeve, pointing urgently toward Naomi, who was being helped from her horse by Parker and Daniel. She needs rest, Reuben told his daughter. Her wounds are infected. Hannah nodded, then slipped away to the tent, returning moments later with a small cloth bundle. She offered it to Reuben, unwrapping it to reveal dried herbs and roots. Medicine? Reuben asked, surprised. Daniel appeared at Hannah's side. Willow bark for fever, yarrow for infection. He identified the herbs. Smart girl. Where did you learn this? Hannah pointed to Naomi. She taught you? Reuben asked. Hannah nodded. When? While you were hunting, Ruth explained. Ms. Clark showed Hannah all the plants around our cabin. Said they were medicine during the war when nothing else was available. Daniel took the herbs respectfully. I will prepare them. Bring your friend to the fire. They settled Naomi close to the flames where Daniel steeped the herbs in hot water. Parker and Amos tended the horses, while Ruth chattered excitedly about their adventure with Mr. Parker and Mr. Redhawk. And Mr. Redhawk showed us how to walk without making noise, and how to find water even when you can't see it. And, Ruth, Reuben interrupted gently, perhaps you and Hannah should rest now. Tomorrow will be another long day. But I'm not tired, Ruth protested, even as she failed to stifle a yawn. Bed, Reuben said firmly, both of you. When the girls had reluctantly returned to their tent, Reuben accepted a cup of coffee from Parker, who had rejoined them by the fire. Amos sat nearby, clearly determined to be part of the adult conversation. Your son says Blackwood's men came to your cabin, Parker said. How many? 6, maybe more, Amos answered before Reuben could. We saw them from the ridge. They searched the place, then set fire to it. Reuben closed his eyes briefly. Another home lost. Did they follow you? No, sir, Amos said. We did like you taught us in redemption. Used the stream to hide our tracks. Daniel offered the herbal infusion to Naomi, who drank it with a grimace. Bitter, she murmured. Medicine worth having rarely tastes good, the Lakota replied with the ghost of a smile. Parker spread a map on the ground between them. We're here, he said, pointing to a spot near the territorial border. Trading post is 12 miles north. From there, we have options. We need to get these documents to Judge Montgomery, Reuben said. St. Louis is a long journey with 3 children and a wounded woman, Parker observed. We've made longer with less, Reuben replied. There's also the matter of witnesses, Naomi said, her voice stronger after the medicine. Sarah Winters knows everything, but she's still in Hollow Creek. And Pastor Johnson, her voice faltered. Dead, Reuben confirmed grimly. Murdered by Lockett when we escaped. Parker's face hardened. We'll add it to Blackwood's charges, but first we need you both safely out of his reach. What about Wade Lockett? Naomi asked. He's Blackwood's enforcer, but he's also a victim. His wife, his son. The man shot a preacher in cold blood, Parker said. Victim or not, he's made his choice. Daniel, who had been quietly tending the fire, spoke up. Sometimes a man follows a false path so long, he forgets how to walk straight. Doesn't mean he can't learn again. Poetic but not practical, Parker replied. We can't save everyone caught in Blackwood's web. No, Reuben agreed, but we need to try. These aren't just criminals, they're our countrymen. This is what the war was supposed to settle. The war settled nothing, Daniel said softly. Just changed the uniforms of those with power. They talked strategy late into the night, planning routes, contingencies, methods of getting evidence and testimonies to federal authorities. Amos eventually fell asleep by the fire, his young face relaxed in slumber, despite the grave matters being discussed. Reuben carried him to the children's tent, then returned to find Naomi still awake, her fever reduced by Daniel's remedies. You should rest, he told her, settling beside her near the fire. Parker and Daniel had withdrawn to keep watch, leaving them alone. Every time I close my eyes, I see Johnson falling, she admitted. Hear that gunshot? I know. Reuben stared into the flames. I still hear the doctor telling me Margaret wouldn't last the night. Still see Amos's face when I told him his mother was gone. How do you bear it? One day at a time, for the children. Naomi was silent for a long moment. If I had children, perhaps I would have found that strength. Instead, I let grief consume me after James died. Let Blackwood's hatred seep into my soul until I nearly believed I deserved what happened. No one deserves what was done to you. I know that now. She turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. Because of you. You showed me there are still good men in this world, men who stand for something besides power and greed. Reuben shook his head. I'm no hero, Naomi. just a stubborn fool who can't walk away from a fight, even when he should. That's exactly what a hero is. She reached for his hand, her fingers cool against his skin. A person who does what's right, even when it costs them everything. Reuben didn't pull away, but conflict showed plainly on his face. I've already lost one wife because of my principles. Nearly lost my children, too. I'm not asking for promises, Reuben, just acknowledging a truth. You saved more than my life. You saved my belief that justice is possible in this world. Before he could respond, a low whistle came from the darkness. Parker's warning signal. They froze, listening. Hoofbeats, distant but approaching. Many horses, moving fast. Daniel materialized from the shadows. Riders from the south, 20, maybe more. Blackwood, Reuben asked, already on his feet. Or bounty hunters? Parker replied, joining them. Either way, we need to move. Now. They broke camp with practiced efficiency. The children, groggy but obedient, were quickly loaded onto horses. Daniel extinguished the fire, scattering the evidence of their presence. Trading post is too obvious, Parker decided. They'll check there first. We need somewhere to hole up. Let them pass by mine. There's an abandoned silver mine 5 miles east, Daniel suggested. Narrow entrance, defensible position. How did they find us so quickly? Naomi wondered, mounting her horse with Reuben's help. Blackwood has informers everywhere, Parker said grimly, and money loosens many tongues. They rode through the darkness, keeping to game trails and dry creek beds to minimize tracks. The children remained silent, even Ruth understanding the gravity of their situation. After an hour of hard riding, they reached the mine, a dark opening in a rocky hillside nearly hidden by overgrown brush. Daniel led them inside where the tunnel widened into a larger chamber. Used by smugglers during the war, he explained, lighting a small lantern. Forgotten now. They settled the children in a dry corner, using blankets to make a makeshift bed. Amos insisted on keeping his rifle, positioning himself protectively near his sisters. Reuben, Parker, and Daniel took up positions near the entrance, while Naomi remained with the children. They'll pass by, Parker said, though he didn't sound convinced. Continue north to the trading post. And if they don't, Reuben asked. Parker checked his revolver. Then we make a stand. Hours passed in tense silence. Dawn lightened the sky outside, birds beginning their morning songs. Perhaps they had evaded pursuit after all. Then came the sound they'd been dreading. Hoofbeats approaching, men's voices calling to each other as they spread out to search. Found tracks, someone shouted, leading east. Reuben exchanged glances with Parker. They'd been found. How many bullets do you have? Parker asked quietly. 12, Reuben replied, plus Amos's rifle. Not enough, Daniel said, notching an arrow to his bow, a weapon Reuben had initially taken for a hunting tool, but now recognized as deadly serious. There's another way, Naomi said suddenly, emerging from the shadows. I could surrender myself, buy you time to escape with the children and the evidence. Absolutely not, Reuben said. It makes sense. I'm who they want. They want all of us now, Parker corrected her. Blackwood can't afford witnesses. Outside, horses approached the mine entrance. A familiar voice called into the darkness. Kane, I know you're in there. Come out and face me like a man. Wade Lockett, Reuben's grip tightened on his revolver. Take the children deeper into the mine, he instructed Naomi. There might be another way out. There isn't, Daniel said. This is where we stand. Kane, Lockett called again. Send out the woman and maybe the rest of you live. Mayor's orders. Blackwood isn't here, Parker murmured, surprised. Staying clean, Daniel replied with disgust. Letting others dirty their hands. Reuben moved to the mine entrance, keeping to the shadows. Lockett, he called. We have evidence of Blackwood's crimes, documented proof of corruption, extortion, even treason during the war. Is that who you're willing to die for? Silence followed his words. Your wife didn't kill herself because of Naomi Clark, Reuben continued. She killed herself because of what Blackwood did to her. The same thing he did to Sarah Winter's daughter. To who knows how many other women. Shut your mouth. Lockett's voice cracked with emotion. It's the truth, Wade. Ask yourself why Blackwood was so eager to blame Naomi for everything. Why he needed a scapegoat. Why he sent you to do his killing. More silence. Then, you're lying. I have proof, documents in Blackwood's own hand. Your wife's name is in them, Wade. So is your son's. A murmur ran through the men outside, doubt, perhaps, or curiosity. Let me show you, Reuben pressed his advantage. Just you, Wade, man to man. It's a trap, someone cautioned Lockett. Maybe, Lockett replied. Then louder. Throw out your guns, all of you, then I'll come in alone. Reuben looked to Parker, who shrugged. Worth a try. Better than dying in a mine. They placed their weapons on the ground, sliding them toward the entrance. Daniel reluctantly set down his bow. We're unarmed, Reuben called. Just you, Wade. No one else. I am. After a long moment, Lockett's silhouette appeared in the mine entrance. He held a revolver ready, his face haggard in the early morning light. Where's this proof? He demanded. Reuben slowly withdrew the documents from inside his coat. Right here, Blackwood's own records. Lockett approached cautiously, taking the papers with his free hand, eyes never leaving Reuben. He scanned the documents, expression shifting from skepticism to confusion to dawning horror. This can't be right, he muttered. It's all there, Wade. Everything Blackwood's done, including what happened to Abigail. Lockett's hand trembled as he read the entry about his wife. Clinical, detached notes about her usefulness in securing compliance, and unfortunate emotional instability afterward. Lockett couldn't finish the sentence. He used her to control you, Naomi said, stepping forward despite Reuben's warning glance. Just as he used James's death to control me, to turn the town against me. Lockett looked up, really seeing Naomi for the first time. Not the witch Blackwood had created, but a woman, wounded, grieving, yet unbowed. I killed Johnson, Lockett said, voice hollow. An innocent man. Yes, Reuben acknowledged, but you can still choose differently now. Outside, men were growing restless. Lockett, what's happening in there? Lockett seemed not to hear them, still staring at the documents. Samuel, he whispered his son's name. Did Blackwood? I don't know, Reuben said honestly, but he used your boy's death, just like he's used every tragedy to strengthen his hold on Hollow Creek. Something shifted in Lockett's eyes, grief giving way to rage. His gaze hardened as he handed the documents back to Reuben. Wait here, he said, turning toward the entrance. Wade? Reuben began, but Lockett cut him off. I know what I'm doing. He strode out of the mine, back straight, gun holstered. They heard his voice, steady now with terrible purpose. Stand down, boys. There's been a change of plans. What are you talking about? McCready's voice. Mayor's orders were clear. Mayor's orders be damned, Lockett replied. I've seen the truth. Blackwood's been lying to us all. Uncertain murmurs from the men outside. You're talking crazy, Wade, McCready said. Step aside. No. A gunshot echoed, then another. Men shouted. Horses whinnied in panic. Parker lunged for his discarded revolver, Daniel for his bow. Reuben hesitated, torn between joining the fight and protecting his family. Then Lockett staggered back into the mine, blood spreading across his shirt. Run, he gasped, collapsing to his knees. They're coming. Reuben caught him as he fell. Wade? I shot McCready, Lockett said, blood bubbling at his lips. Rest are confused, fighting each other. Go. While you can. Daniel appeared at Reuben's side. Back exit, hidden for emergencies. You said there wasn't one. Lied, in case he was not true. Daniel nodded toward Lockett. But he is. Naomi knelt beside the dying man. Thank you, Wade. Lockett's eyes were already glazing. Tell them, tell everyone what Blackwood did. Make it right. We will, Reuben promised. You have my word. Lockett's hand clutched Reuben's coat, then went slack. His final breath rattled out, eyes fixed on something none of them could see. Outside, the gunfire had stopped. Voices approached the mine entrance again. Time to go, Parker urged. Now. Daniel led them deeper into the mine, to a narrow fissure hidden behind fallen rocks. One by one they squeezed through, emerging into a ravine on the other side of the hill, where Daniel had hidden spare horses. As they mounted, more gunshots echoed from the mine entrance. They rode hard, not looking back. The children silent with terror, Naomi swaying with exhaustion but keeping pace. They had escaped, but barely. And Blackwood, Reuben knew, would not stop hunting them. The evidence was their only hope now. If they could just get it to someone who would act on it before Blackwood's reach closed around them completely. They rode until the horses could go no further, following game trails and dried creek beds to avoid leaving obvious tracks. By midday, they reached a secluded valley where a small stream provided water. Daniel declared it safe enough to rest, for a few hours at least. Reuben helped Naomi dismount, alarmed by her pallor. Despite Daniel's herbal remedies, infection still raged through her body. She needed a doctor, proper medicine, clean bandages, none of which they had access to in the wilderness. "We need to reach that trading post," Reuben told Parker as they watered the horses. Parker nodded grimly. "Another 15 miles north. We can make it by nightfall if we push hard." "Naomi can't push much harder." "I know." Parker scanned the horizon, squinting against the midday sun. "But staying in one place too long is asking for trouble. Blackwood's men could be anywhere." Ruth and Hannah had fallen asleep beneath a cottonwood tree, exhaustion finally claiming them. Amos sat nearby, rifle across his knees, his young face set in lines too old for his years. "Get some rest, son," Reuben said, crouching beside him. "I'll keep watch." Amos shook his head stubbornly. "I'm not tired." "You don't have to carry everything, Amos. That's my job." "You're busy carrying her," the boy replied, nodding toward Naomi, who sat by the stream, washing her face in the cool water. Reuben studied his son's expression, recognizing the mixture of fear and resentment. "Is that what's bothering you? That I'm helping Ms. Clark?" Amos looked away. "You always do this. Find some fight that isn't yours, some person who needs saving. Then we pay the price." The accusation stung because it carried truth. "This time is different," Reuben said. "How? Our home is burned. Again. We're running. Again." Amos's voice cracked slightly. "When does it stop, Pa? When do we get to just live?" Reuben had no ready answer. Since Margaret's death, they'd moved 4 times, always one step ahead of trouble. Some of it Reuben's making, some of it not. Always promising the children that the next place would be home, always watching that promise turn to ash. "I don't know," he admitted finally, "but running from men like Blackwood isn't living, Amos. It's just surviving. And there's a difference." "Maybe surviving is enough." Amos looked at his sleeping sisters. "For them?" Reuben followed his gaze, heart heavy with the weight of his responsibility. "Your mother once told me that the measure of a life isn't in its length or comfort, but in its purpose. She believed that standing for something, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, is what makes us human." "Ma's dead," Amos said flatly. "Her principles didn't save her." "No, they didn't," Reuben's voice roughened, "but they saved something in me, something I'm trying to pass on to you and your sisters." Amos was silent for a long moment, then almost too quietly to hear. "I'm scared, Pa." "I know." Reuben put his arm around his son's thin shoulders. "So am I. But we're going to get through this, together." Daniel approached, his movements silent despite the underbrush. "Riders coming, from the east." Reuben tensed. "Blackwood's men?" "No, different. Military, I think. 6 of them." Parker joined them, hand on his revolver. "Union or Confederate?" "Blue coats. Regular patrol, maybe." Daniel's expression revealed nothing of his own feelings about the U.S. cavalry, though Reuben could guess they were complex at best. "We could approach them," Reuben suggested. "Ask for protection." Parker shook his head. "Risky. Blackwood has connections in the military. We don't know which officers might be in his pocket." "We can't outrun them," Reuben pointed out. "Not with exhausted horses and children." "We don't need to run or fight," Naomi said, joining their discussion. Despite her weakness, her mind remained sharp. "We need a messenger, someone to take the evidence to Judge Montgomery while the rest of us continue north." Parker considered this. "Splitting up increases the chances that some of us make it through." "I'll go," Reuben decided. "Alone, the rest of you continue to the trading post." "No," Parker countered. "You stay with your children. I'll go. The judge knows me. He'll act on my word." "And if you're caught, what happens to your children then?" The argument might have continued, but Daniel raised his hand for silence. "They've changed direction. Coming this way now." "They've spotted our tracks," Parker cursed. "No time to run. Hide the children and Naomi." Reuben and I will meet them. Amos refused to be hidden, insisting on standing with his father. Daniel reluctantly agreed, leading Ruth, Hannah, and Naomi deeper into the brush, while Parker and Reuben moved to intercept the approaching riders. The cavalry patrol emerged from the trees, 6 men led by a lieutenant with a weathered face and calculating eyes. They reined in their horses at the sight of Reuben and Parker standing openly in the clearing. "Afternoon, gentlemen," the lieutenant called. "Little off the beaten path, aren't you?" "Just resting our horses," Parker replied. "On our way to Fort Laramie." The lieutenant dismounted, studying them with professional suspicion. "I'm Lieutenant Wallace, 7th Cavalry. Mind if I ask your business in the territory?" "Trading expedition," Parker said smoothly. "I represent Buchanan and Sons out of St. Louis." "And you?" Wallace turned to Reuben. "Legal counsel," Reuben replied, falling back on his former profession. "Ensuring contracts are properly executed." "With a boy?" Wallace nodded toward Amos. "My son, family business." Wallace seemed unconvinced. "You're well armed for traitors." "Territory's not as settled as the government claims," Parker commented. "As you well know, Lieutenant." One of the troopers leaned down to murmur something to Wallace, who nodded thoughtfully. "Funny coincidence. We received word about fugitives in this area, a man fitting your description, traveling with a woman and children, wanted for questioning in connection with a murder in Hollow Creek." Reuben's hand drifted toward his revolver. "Is that so?" "The murder of a preacher, I'm told. Respected community leader." "Whoever told you that is lying," Reuben said. "The preacher was murdered by the town's deputy on orders from Mayor Blackwood." Wallace's eyebrows rose. "Serious accusation against a territorial official." "I have proof." Reuben reached slowly inside his coat, withdrawing some of the documents they'd taken from Blackwood's office. "Evidence of corruption, extortion, even treason during the war." Wallace accepted the papers, scanning them with growing interest. "These appear authentic." "They are, taken from Blackwood's own files." "Which would make you burglars as well as fugitives," Wallace observed, though without heat. "Sometimes the law must be bent to see justice done," Reuben replied. "I think a military man understands that." Wallace handed the documents back. "Perhaps, but my orders come from territorial authorities. I'm to detain anyone matching your description and return them to Hollow Creek for questioning." Parker's hand moved to his gun. "That's not going to happen, Lieutenant." The soldiers tensed, hands dropping to their weapons. Amos gripped his rifle tighter, looking to his father for guidance. "Wait," Reuben said, raising his empty hand. "Lieutenant, you seem like an honorable man. I'm asking you to consider what's happening here. Ezekiel Blackwood has corrupted local government, committed crimes during and after the war, and now seeks to silence witnesses. Among those witnesses are my children and a woman who was nearly whipped to death on his orders." Wallace frowned. "Whipped?" 100 lashes for the crime of being unable to bear children. Left for dead by the river. I found her, cared for her, and now Blackwood wants us all silenced." The lieutenant studied Reuben's face, weighing his words. "These are extraordinary claims. Backed by evidence I'm willing to present to any legitimate authority, but not to Blackwood or his men." A tense silence fell over the clearing. The soldiers awaited their lieutenant's command. Parker and Reuben stood ready, knowing they were outgunned but unwilling to surrender. Finally, Wallace spoke. "Private Jenkins." A young soldier straightened in his saddle. "Sir?" "Ride for Fort Laramie. Inform Colonel Harrison we've encountered civilians with evidence of corruption against Territorial Mayor Blackwood. Request further instructions." "Yes, sir." The private saluted and wheeled his horse, galloping northward. Wallace turned back to Reuben. "Until I receive orders otherwise, you and your companions will remain under my protection, but not as prisoners, as witnesses under military escort." Relief washed through Reuben. "Thank you, Lieutenant." "Don't thank me yet. If your claims prove false, you'll face charges for slander, burglary, and evading lawful authorities." "They'll prove true," Reuben assured him. "Every word." Wallace nodded. "Then you have nothing to fear from justice. Where are the others?" Daniel emerged from the brush, hands empty, and raised to show he carried no weapon. "Here," he called, "with the children and the wounded woman." The soldiers shifted uneasily at the sight of a Lakota, but Wallace showed no reaction beyond a slight narrowing of his eyes. "Bring them out. We'll make camp here tonight. My men will stand guard." As Daniel went to fetch Naomi and the girls, Wallace stepped closer to Reuben, speaking for his ears alone. For what it's worth, I've met Blackwood. Never did trust him. Too smooth by half. You know him? Crossed paths during the war. He was investigating missing prisoners. Ironic, if your documents are correct. Wallace's expression hardened. Good men died because of those disappearances. Union boys who should have come home. Then help us stop him, Reuben urged, before more people suffer. I intend to, but through proper channels, Mr. Kane. The war taught us the cost of taking justice into our own hands. Naomi emerged from hiding, supported by Daniel. Ruth and Hannah followed, the younger girl running immediately to her father, while Hannah approached more cautiously, studying the soldiers with wary eyes. Lieutenant Wallace's expression softened at the sight of the children, then hardened again when he saw Naomi's condition. Even with her wounds bandaged and covered, her pain and weakness were evident. Ma'am, he said, tipping his hat respectfully, I understand you've suffered greatly. You have my word you'll receive proper medical attention at Fort Laramie. Thank you, Lieutenant, Naomi replied, her voice strained but dignified. Though I fear we're bringing trouble to your door. Trouble seems to have found you all quite effectively without my assistance, Wallace observed dryly. My men will make camp. Please rest. You're safe now. As the soldiers busied themselves setting up a perimeter, Reuben helped Naomi to a comfortable spot beneath a tree. Parker and Daniel conferred quietly, clearly discussing whether this new development was a blessing or a trap. Do you trust him? Naomi asked Reuben, nodding toward Wallace. I think so. He seems honorable. Reuben adjusted her shawl around her shoulders. And we're running out of options. If Colonel Harrison is in Blackwood's pocket, then we're in trouble. But we can't run forever, Naomi, especially not with you in this condition. She managed a weak smile. Are you saying I'm slowing you down, Mr. Kane? I'm saying I don't want to lose you. The words escaped before he could consider them, hanging in the air between them. Naomi's smile faded, replaced by an expression of vulnerable surprise. Reuben? Before she could continue, Ruth bounded over, excitement overwhelming her earlier fear. Pa, the soldiers have coffee and real sugar. Lieutenant Wallace said we could have some. The moment broken, Reuben forced a smile for his daughter. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Why don't you see if Hannah wants some too? As Ruth dashed off, Naomi touched Reuben's hand lightly. We'll continue this conversation later, she promised, when we're truly safe. Night fell over their makeshift camp. The cavalry had erected 2 small tents, one for Naomi and the girls, another for Reuben and Amos. The soldiers themselves maintained a rotating watch, 2 men always alert while the others rested around the campfire. Lieutenant Wallace had shared their rations, salt pork, hardtack, and the promised coffee, and treated Naomi's wounds with a proper medical kit. Her fever had diminished somewhat, though she remained worryingly weak. Reuben sat by the fire, unable to sleep despite his exhaustion. Parker joined him, offering a tin cup of coffee. What's your assessment? Reuben asked quietly, nodding toward the soldiers. Parker sipped his own coffee before answering. Wallace seems legitimate. His men are disciplined, professional. If he wanted to arrest us, or worse, he'd have done it already. And Colonel Harrison? Unknown. But Fort Laramie's commanding officer answers directly to General Sheridan. Even if Harrison is compromised, there's a chain of command Blackwood can't entirely control. Reuben nodded, somewhat reassured. Where's Daniel? Scouting the perimeter. He doesn't trust the military. Can't blame him. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Parker spoke again. I've been meaning to ask, what's your plan if we succeed? If Blackwood is arrested, justice served? Reuben stared into the flames. I haven't thought that far ahead. You should. Those children need stability. And Naomi. What about her? Parker's weathered face creased in a knowing smile. I've seen how you look at her, how she looks at you. It's not that simple. It never is. But life's too short for maybes, Kane. I learned that in the war. Parker stood, stretching his back. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's another long day. Reuben remained by the fire after Parker left, thoughts circling from his children to Naomi to the uncertain future. For so long, he'd focused only on surviving, on justice, on righting wrongs. The possibility of happiness Real, lasting happiness seemed almost unthinkable after so much loss. A soft footfall pulled him from his reverie. Hannah stood nearby, a blanket wrapped around her small shoulders, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "Can't sleep?" Reuben asked, making room beside him on the log. She shook her head, settling next to him. From her pocket, she withdrew another of her carved wooden birds, this one recognizable as an eagle, wings outstretched in flight. "It's beautiful," Reuben said, accepting the gift. "Is it for me?" Hannah nodded, then pointed toward the tent where Naomi slept. "For both of us?" Reuben guessed. Another nod, more emphatic. Hannah's hands moved in a gesture that Reuben had come to understand over the years, her way of expressing connection, family. "You like her," Reuben said softly. "Naomi." Hannah's expression grew serious. She patted her own chest, then made a circular motion that encompassed Reuben, herself, and the tents where her siblings slept. "Our family," Reuben translated. Then Hannah pointed to the tent where Naomi rested. The meaning was clear, even without words. Hannah was giving her blessing in her own silent way. Reuben pulled his daughter close, kissing the top of her head. "When did you get so wise, little one?" She nestled against him, and they sat together watching the fire until her breathing deepened into sleep. Reuben carried her back to her tent, tucking her in beside Ruth before returning to his own tent, where Amos slept restlessly. He was nearly asleep himself when Daniel slipped into the tent, his expression grave. "Riders coming," he whispered. "Many, from the south." Reuben was instantly alert. "Blackwood's men?" "Yes, at least 20, maybe more. Still a few miles off, but moving fast." "Does Wallace know?" "I've told him. He's preparing his men." Reuben pulled on his boots. 6 soldiers against 20 gunmen. Not good odds. "Worse," Daniel said grimly. "I recognize some of them. They're not just hired guns. Former Confederate guerrillas, men who never accepted surrender. Dangerous." Outside, Lieutenant Wallace was quietly organizing his men, positioning them strategically around the camp. He nodded to Reuben as he emerged from the tent. "Your friend spotted trouble," Wallace said. "How good is his eyesight?" "The best. If Daniel says 20 riders, it's 20 riders." Wallace's expression remained calm, but concern showed in his eyes. "That puts us at a significant disadvantage. We need to move the children and Naomi, now." "Agreed, but where? We're exposed here, and they'll overtake us on the open trail." Daniel joined them. "There's a box canyon 2 miles north. Narrow entrance, steep walls. Defensible." Wallace considered this. "We'd be trapped." "Better trapped with defensible ground than caught in the open," Reuben argued. The lieutenant nodded sharply. "Wake your family. We move in 5 minutes." Reuben roused the children, urging them to dress quickly. Naomi was already awake in the adjacent tent, struggling to put on her boots despite her weakness. "Blackwood?" she asked as Reuben helped her. "His men, coming in force." Fear crossed her face, but she mastered it quickly. "The evidence, safe," Reuben assured her, patting his coat where the documents remained hidden. "Can you ride?" "If the alternative is staying here, I can ride." They broke camp with military efficiency, the soldiers extinguishing the fire and erasing signs of their presence. Within minutes, they were mounted and moving north through the darkness, Daniel leading the way to the canyon he'd described. They rode in tense silence, the only sounds the soft thud of hooves on earth and the occasional creak of saddle leather. Ruth clung to Reuben, seated before him on his horse. Hannah rode with Parker, while Amos insisted on riding alone despite his father's concern. The canyon appeared as a dark slash in the landscape, its entrance barely visible in the pre-dawn gloom. Daniel led them inside, where the walls rose steeply on either side, creating a natural fortress. "There's a spring at the back," Daniel explained, "fresh water, and caves for shelter." Wallace examined the terrain with a professional eye. "Defensible, certainly, but as I said, we're trapped if they lay siege." "Private Jenkins should reach Fort Laramie by mid-morning," Reuben pointed out. "Reinforcements could arrive by afternoon." "If the colonel dispatches them immediately," Wallace replied, a significant if. They established positions, the soldiers taking the most exposed spots near the canyon entrance, while Reuben and Parker created a fallback position halfway up the canyon. The children and Naomi were placed in the rear, near the spring and caves Daniel had mentioned. As dawn broke, Lieutenant Wallace returned from his reconnaissance at the canyon mouth. "They found our trail, less than an hour behind us now." "Any chance they'll pass by?" Parker asked without much hope. "None. They're following our tracks directly." Reuben checked his revolver, counting bullets. 6 shots, not enough for a prolonged firefight. "We need to delay them until reinforcements arrive." "My men will hold the entrance as long as possible," Wallace said. "You stay with your family, be ready to cover our retreat if necessary." Before Reuben could respond, a shout came from the soldier on watch. "Riders approaching!" They rushed to the canyon entrance, taking cover behind boulders. In the growing light, Reuben could make out a column of riders approaching at a gallop, 20 or more, heavily armed, led by a figure he recognized even at a distance. Silas McCready, the bounty hunter they'd encountered at the cabin. He'd survived the confrontation at the mine then. And from the way he rode, confident, determined, he had unfinished business. "They'll be in range in 2 minutes," Wallace said calmly. "My men will target the leaders first. Aim to disable, not kill, unless absolutely necessary." "These men won't show the same restraint," Reuben warned. "Perhaps not, but we still represent the United States Army. We'll conduct ourselves accordingly." The riders drew closer, dust rising from their horses' hooves. When they were about 300 yards away, McCready raised his hand, signaling his men to halt. "Lieutenant Wallace," he called, his voice carrying clearly across the distance. "This doesn't concern the Army. We're here for the civilians only." Wallace stepped partially into view, though still protected by a boulder. "These people are under military protection, sir. I suggest you turn back." McCready laughed, an ugly sound. "6 soldiers against my men? Those aren't favorable odds, Lieutenant. Nevertheless, you will have to go through us to reach them. I have a warrant from Territorial Governor Davis himself." McCready held up a paper. "For the arrest of Reuben Kane and Naomi Clark on charges of murder, theft, and insurrection." Wallace didn't flinch. "Any such warrant must be executed through proper military channels in this district. Fall back and take your complaint to Fort Laramie." McCready conferred briefly with his men, then called out again. "We have no quarrel with the U.S. Army, Lieutenant, but we're taking those fugitives one way or another." "That's not going to happen." McCready's response was to raise his rifle and fire. The shot struck the boulder near Wallace's head, sending stone fragments flying. The battle had begun. The soldiers returned fire with disciplined volleys, dropping 2 of McCready's men immediately. The bounty hunter scattered, taking cover behind rocks and scrub brush, returning fire in a less coordinated but still dangerous fusillade. Reuben fired carefully, making each shot count. Beside him, Parker did the same, while Daniel used his bow with deadly accuracy from a higher position on the canyon wall. For several minutes, the exchange continued, neither side gaining advantage. Then one of Wallace's men cried out, clutching his shoulder where a bullet had found its mark. "Fall back to the secondary position," Wallace ordered. The soldiers retreated in good order, 2 men providing covering fire while the others moved deeper into the canyon. McCready's men, sensing advantage, pressed forward. From his new position, Reuben could see the attackers more clearly now. They were a hardened lot, former soldiers, gunslingers, men for whom violence was a way of life, and they were gaining ground steadily. "We can't hold them much longer," Parker muttered, reloading his revolver. "Not without reinforcements." Reuben glanced back toward where his children huddled with Naomi. Hannah's face was pale but composed, her arm around Ruth, who had buried her face against her sister's shoulder. Amos stood protectively before them, his rifle ready despite his trembling hands. "We have to," Reuben said simply. A new volley of gunfire erupted, more intense than before. One of Wallace's soldiers fell, a bullet in his leg. Another took a graze across his forehead, blood streaming into his eyes. Then came a sound that froze Reuben's blood, a scream from behind him. Ruth's voice high with terror. He spun to see 3 men emerging from a narrow side passage he hadn't noticed, a fissure in the canyon wall that had allowed them to circle behind the defenders. One had grabbed Ruth, while another held Amos at gunpoint. The third was advancing on Naomi and Hannah. "Kane," McCready shouted from the canyon entrance, "surrender now, or watch your children die." Reuben stood, hands raised, revolver dangling from his finger. "Don't hurt them," he called. "I'm coming out." "Pa, no!" Amos struggled against his captor. "It's all right, son," Reuben said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Everything's going to be all right." He walked forward slowly, acutely aware of all eyes upon him. McCready's men, Wallace's soldiers, his own children. Parker cursed quietly but didn't interfere. Daniel had disappeared, perhaps seeking a better position for a last, desperate shot. "Drop the gun," ordered the man holding Ruth. Reuben complied, letting his revolver fall to the ground. "Let my daughter go." "All in good time," the man replied, his beard split in a yellow-toothed grin. "Once you and the woman are secured." Naomi stepped forward, hands raised. "I'll go willingly. Just release the children." "Naomi, don't," Reuben began. "This is my fight, Reuben. Has been from the beginning." Her eyes met his, conveying what words could not. "I won't have more blood on my conscience." The standoff might have ended there, with Reuben and Naomi taken, the children perhaps spared, if not for Hannah. Silent Hannah, who had not spoken a word in 3 years, suddenly lunged forward, sinking her teeth into the arm of the man reaching for her. He howled in pain and surprise, his gun discharging into the air. The sound startled Ruth's captor just enough for the girl to break free, running toward her father. Chaos erupted. McCready's men at the canyon entrance renewed their assault. Wallace and his remaining soldiers returned fire. Amos broke away from his distracted guard, diving for Reuben's discarded revolver. "Run!" Reuben shouted to his children, grabbing Ruth as she reached him. "To the caves, now!" Hannah was already moving, pulling Naomi toward the back of the canyon. Amos fired Reuben's revolver at their pursuers, buying precious seconds before following. A bullet struck the rock near Reuben's head as he ran, carrying Ruth. Another tore through his coat sleeve. Behind him, McCready bellowed orders, his men advancing relentlessly. They reached the caves just as Wallace fell, a bullet in his chest. His remaining soldiers continued fighting, but they were hopelessly outnumbered now. The cave entrance was narrow, defensible, but also a trap. Inside, darkness enveloped them, broken only by a shaft of light from a small opening in the ceiling. Parker was already there, positioning himself at the entrance. "Get deeper in," he ordered. "There's another passage at the back. Might lead out." Reuben set Ruth down. "Hannah, take your sister. Follow that passage. Amos, go with them." "I'm staying with you," Amos insisted. "Not this time, son." Reuben gripped his shoulder. "Your sisters need you, and so does Ms. Clark." Naomi had collapsed against the cave wall, her strength finally giving out. "Reuben," she whispered, "on the evidence. If they take us, they won't get the documents," he assured her, transferring the papers from his coat to a small leather pouch, which he handed to Amos. "Get these to Fort Laramie, to Colonel Harrison. No one else." Amos took the pouch, his young face a mask of conflicting emotions: fear, determination, desperation. "You're coming too." "As soon as I can." Reuben embraced his son fiercely. "I'm proud of you, Amos. So proud. Now go." Gunfire grew louder outside. Parker fired twice from the cave entrance, then ducked back in. "They're almost here. Whatever you're doing, do it fast." Hannah appeared at Reuben's side, tugging at his coat. Her eyes were wide, urgent. She pointed to the back passage, then to Naomi, then to Reuben himself. "I'll be right behind you," he promised. Hannah shook her head vehemently. Then to Reuben's astonishment, she spoke, her voice rusty from disuse but clear. "Together," she said. "Family stays together." The single word broke something in Reuben, a dam of grief and guilt he'd carried since Margaret's death. His daughter's voice, silent for 3 long years, now called him back to what mattered most. "Together," he agreed, his own voice rough with emotion. He helped Naomi to her feet. Parker gave them a grim nod, understanding passing between the men. "I'll hold them as long as I can," Parker said. "Get the children out. Get that evidence to Harrison." "Josiah, no time for goodbyes, counselor. Just make sure it counts." Parker checked his ammunition. "I'll find Daniel if I can. We'll catch up." They both knew it was unlikely, but Reuben nodded anyway. "Godspeed." "And to you." Reuben led his family deeper into the cave, following the narrow passage that twisted and descended into the earth. Behind them, gunfire echoed, Parker making his last stand. Ahead lay only darkness and uncertainty. But Hannah had spoken, and they were together. For now, it would have to be enough. Darkness enveloped them as they navigated the narrow cave passage, broken only by occasional shafts of light from cracks in the rock ceiling. Reuben led the way, one hand on the rough wall, the other holding Ruth's small fingers. Amos followed, supporting Naomi, whose strength was failing rapidly. Hannah brought up the rear, silent once more but watchful, her single spoken word seeming to have drained her reserve. The sounds of gunfire grew distant, then faded entirely. Whether because of the cave's winding path or because Parker's desperate stand had ended, Reuben couldn't tell. He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the immediate challenge of finding a way out. "Pa, I can't see anything," Ruth whispered, her voice small with fear. "It's all right," Reuben assured her. "Just hold my hand and keep moving, one step at a time." The passage began to slope downward, the footing becoming treacherous with loose stones and slick patches. Twice Reuben nearly fell, catching himself against the wall. Behind him he heard Naomi's labored breathing, punctuated by occasional gasps of pain. "We need to rest," Amos said, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. Reuben wanted to press on, to put as much distance as possible between them and their pursuers, but he knew Amos was right. They couldn't continue blindly, especially with Naomi's condition deteriorating. "Just a few minutes," he conceded, helping Ruth sit on a relatively flat section of rock. In the darkness, he located Naomi by sound, kneeling beside her as Amos lowered her gently to the ground. Her skin burned beneath his touch, the fever that Daniel's remedies had temporarily abated now returning with vengeance. "I'm slowing you down," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "We move together," Reuben replied, echoing Hannah's unexpected words. "No one gets left behind." A faint scraping sound made him turn. Hannah had struck a match, one of the few they carried, illuminating the passage briefly. In that momentary light, Reuben saw his daughter's face set with determination as she examined the walls around them. The match flickered out, plunging them back into darkness, but Hannah took Reuben's hand and placed something in it, a small, smooth stone. He felt its contours, river-worn, oddly warm. "What is it, Hannah?" In response, she struck another match, pointing to the walls of the passage. By the wavering light, Reuben saw what had caught her attention. Markings, crude but unmistakable. Arrows pointing deeper into the cave. "Someone's been here before," Amos said, peering at the marks. Hannah nodded emphatically, taking the stone from Reuben's hand and holding it to the light. It was black with veins of gold running through it, a mineral specimen. "Gold," Reuben breathed, understanding dawning. "This isn't just a cave. It's an old mine." The match burned down, Hannah's fingers releasing it just before the flame could reach her skin. But the revelation gave her up with a new hope. Mines had entrances, ventilation shafts, perhaps even multiple exits. "We keep following the markings," he decided. "They must lead somewhere." With renewed purpose, they continued, Hannah striking an occasional match to confirm they were still on the right path. The passage widened gradually, showing signs of human modification. Rough-hewn supports, niches for lanterns, even the occasional rusty tool abandoned against the wall. After what seemed like hours but was likely only 40 minutes, Reuben detected a change in the air, a freshness that suggested an opening nearby. The passage began to rise, switchbacking up toward the surface. "Almost there," he encouraged his exhausted family. "Just a little further." They rounded a final bend, and Reuben's outstretched hand encountered not rock but wood, weathered planks nailed together to form a barrier. A door of sorts, blocking whatever lay beyond. "Stand back," he instructed, examining the obstacle by touch. The wood was old, rotted in places. With a concentrated effort, he threw his shoulder against it. The barrier gave way with a splintering crash. Daylight flooding into the passage, momentarily blinding after so long in darkness. Reuben blinked rapidly, shielding his eyes as he stepped through the opening. They emerged onto a small ledge halfway up a steep hillside, overlooking a valley he didn't recognize. The sun was high, midday, perhaps later. They had been underground longer than he'd realize. "Where are we, Toy?" Amos asked, helping Naomi through the opening. Reuben scanned the landscape, getting his bearings. "North of the canyon, I think. Maybe 5 miles or so." "Is it safe?" Ruth peered cautiously over the edge of the ledge. "For now," Reuben replied, though he couldn't be certain. Without Daniel's tracking skills or Parker's military experience, He was navigating blind. The thought of Parker, likely dead in that cave, buying them time with his life, sent a fresh wave of grief through Reuben. Another good man lost to Blackwood's reach. The list grew longer with each passing day. Pa, Amos said, pulling Reuben from his dark thoughts. Ms. Clark needs help, soon. Naomi had collapsed against the hillside, her face ashen, breathing shallow and rapid. The exertion of their escape had pushed her beyond endurance, reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal. Reuben knelt beside her, checking her pulse. Too fast, too weak. We need to find that trading post. It can't be far now. How? Amos gestured at the unfamiliar landscape. We don't even know where we are. Reuben stood, scanning the horizon. To the north, he could make out a thin column of smoke rising above the trees, perhaps a chimney, perhaps a campfire. It was their only lead. There, he pointed. We'll head that way. Can Ms. Clark walk that far? Ruth asked, her young face creased with worry. I'll carry her if I have to. As it turned out, he did. Naomi managed only a few hundred yards before her legs gave out entirely. Without complaint, Reuben lifted her in his arms, her weight slight but still a burden after days of little food and less rest. They made slow progress, following game trails where possible, forging through underbrush where necessary. The smoke grew closer, eventually resolving into a thin plume rising from a stone chimney. A small cabin appeared through the trees, surrounded by a vegetable garden and a split-rail fence. Reuben halted at the edge of the clearing, caution overriding his urgency. Amos, take the girls and hide in those trees. I'll approach alone with Ms. Clark. What if it's a trap? Amos asked, fingering the leather pouch containing their precious evidence. Then get those documents to Fort Laramie, whatever happens. Amos nodded solemnly, leading his sisters into the concealment of a dense pine thicket. Once they were hidden, Reuben adjusted Naomi in his arms and stepped into the open, approaching the cabin slowly. The door opened before he reached it. A woman emerged, rifle in hand though not aimed directly at him. She was perhaps 50, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that had seen too much to be easily surprised. That's far enough, she called, her voice carrying the lilting cadence of Ireland. Stick to your business. My name is Reuben Kane, he replied, stopping where indicated. This woman needs medical help. She's been wounded. The woman's eyes narrowed, assessing them both. How'd she come by those wounds? Whipped, nearly to death, in Hollow Creek, on Mayor Blackwood's orders. Something shifted in the woman's expression, recognition, perhaps, or shared anger. Blackwood, she spat the name like a curse. Bring her inside. Reuben hesitated. I have children with me. 3 of them, hiding in the trees. Call them in, the woman said, lowering her rifle. Any enemy of Ezekiel Blackwood is a friend of mine. Reuben signaled to Amos, who emerged cautiously with his sisters. The woman ushered them all into the cabin, a single room, meticulously clean, with bundles of herbs hanging from the ceiling and shelves lined with glass bottles. Put her on the bed, she instructed, setting her rifle aside and rolling up her sleeves. Children, there's bread and milk on the table. Help yourselves. While Ruth and Hannah gratefully accepted the offered food, Amos stayed close to his father, watching the woman warily as she examined Naomi's wounds. I'm Margaret O'Brien, she introduced herself, hands moving expertly as she peeled back bandages. Most call me Widow O'Brien. I was a nurse during the war. You live out here alone? Reuben asked. By choice, she replied. After my Thomas died at Gettysburg, I found I preferred the company of trees to people. Her mouth tightened as she fully revealed Naomi's back. Who would do this to another human being? A man who believes he's above the law, Reuben said. Above God even. Margaret shook her head in disgust, reaching for a clay pot of salve. These wounds are infected. She needs willow bark for the fever, yarrow for the infection, and clean bandages. I have all 3, praise be. As she worked, Reuben explained their situation, the flight from Hollow Creek, the evidence against Blackwood, the battle at the canyon, their escape through the mine. So Parker and the Lakota stayed behind, Margaret said, her hands never ceasing their careful ministrations. Brave men. They gave their lives for us. Perhaps, perhaps not. Josiah Parker is not an easy man to kill, by all accounts. She looked up from her work. The trading post you seek is only 3 miles north of here, Fort Laramie. Another 20 beyond that. Hope stirred in Reuben's chest. Is there a doctor at the trading post? Dr. Miller, Army surgeon during the war, drinks too much but knows his business. Margaret finished applying a fresh bandage to Naomi's back. She should rest here tonight. Moving her again too soon would be dangerous. We don't have much time, Reuben said, though he knew the widow was right. Blackwood's men can't be far behind. They won't find you here, Margaret said with quiet confidence. My cabin doesn't appear on any maps, and I've had years to perfect my privacy. Naomi stirred on the bed, her eyes opening. Reuben, she called weakly. He moved to her side, taking her hand. I'm here. We're safe for now. The children? All safe. This is Margaret O'Brien. She's helping us. Naomi's gaze shifted to the widow, recognition dawning in her fever-bright eyes. Nurse O'Brien? From the field hospital at Antietam? Margaret leaned closer, studying Naomi's face. My God, Nurse Clark? From the Union Medical Corps? You know each other? Reuben asked, surprised. We work the same tent, Margaret confirmed, a rare smile softening her stern features. This one never slept, never complained, saved more lives than any doctor. Her voice grew gentle. Rest now, Naomi. You're among friends. As Naomi drifted back to sleep, Margaret turned to Reuben. Your children need rest too. And so do you. I'll keep watch. Too exhausted to argue, Reuben allowed himself to be guided to a pallet on the floor. Ruth and Hannah were already asleep, curled together on a braided rug near the hearth. Amos sat beside them, determined to stay awake, though his eyelids drooped heavily. Sleep, son, Reuben urged. Tomorrow will come soon enough. Dawn arrived with the scent of coffee and frying bacon. Reuben woke to find Margaret already moving about the cabin, preparing breakfast. Naomi was awake too, sitting propped against pillows, some color returned to her cheeks. The fever broke during the night, Margaret reported. She's not out of danger, but she's improving. Outside, a horse nickered softly. Reuben tensed, hand moving instinctively to his side before remembering he'd lost his revolver in the cave. It's all right, Margaret assured him. My guests arrived about an hour ago. Guests? The door opened, and Daniel Redhawk stepped in, ducking his head beneath the low lintel. Behind him came Parker, arm in a makeshift sling, face bruised but very much alive. Parker! Reuben exclaimed, rising to greet the man he'd thought dead. How? Your Indian friend, Parker nodded toward Daniel, found another way out of those caves. Dragged me half-conscious through passages a snake would find cramped. He grimaced, touching his wounded arm. Not my most dignified moment. You're alive, that's what matters. Barely, Parker admitted. McCready's men killed Wallace and his soldiers. Would have killed us too if Daniel hadn't known those caves. Amos and the girls had awakened, Ruth running to hug Parker while Hannah offered a rare smile to Daniel. The Lakota acknowledged it with a slight nod, his normally impassive expression warming. What about McCready? Reuben asked. Still hunting, Daniel replied, but looking in wrong direction. Think we went east. Margaret served breakfast, bacon, biscuits, strong coffee for the adults, and milk for the children. As they ate, they discussed their next move. Fort Laramie is our best option, Parker said. Colonel Harrison needs to see that evidence. Assuming he's not in Blackwood's pocket, Reuben cautioned. Harrison's a career officer, by the book and ambitious, Parker replied. Even if Blackwood has approached him, Harrison won't risk his reputation on a losing wager. Once he sees these documents, he'll act, if only to position himself as the hero who exposed corruption. And if he doesn't, then we telegraph Judge Montgomery directly. Military lines can't be easily intercepted. Naomi joined the conversation from her place on the bed. What about Sarah Winters and the other witnesses in Hollow Creek? We can't abandon them to Blackwood's revenge. One battle at a time, Parker advised. First we secure military protection, then we return for the townspeople. Reuben wasn't entirely convinced, but he knew their options were limited. With the children's safety his primary concern, Fort Laramie represented their best hope for both protection and justice. We'll leave at noon, he decided. Miss Clark, can you travel? I'll manage, she replied, her voice stronger than it had been in days. Margaret cleared the breakfast dishes. I have a wagon. Not fancy, but it'll be easier on her than horseback. You've done too much already, Reuben protested. I've done what any decent person would, Margaret corrected him, and I'm not finished yet. I'm coming with you. It's too dangerous. I nursed soldiers through Antietam, Gettysburg, and Cold Harbor. Mr. Kane, Danger and I are old acquaintances. Her tone brooked no argument. Besides, Naomi needs continued care, and I have a score of my own to settle with Ezekiel Blackwood. Reuben raised an eyebrow. What did Blackwood do to you? It's not what he did to me, Margaret replied, her voice hardening. It's what he did to my son. Michael was a prisoner of war captured at Fredericksburg. One of those who disappeared during transport, ransomed back to me for everything I own, only to die of the injuries he'd sustained in captivity. The pieces fell into place for Reuben. That's why you live out here. You lost everything. Everything but my skill as a healer and my memory of who caused my grief. She met his gaze directly. I've waited 7 years for a chance at justice. I'm not missing it now. By noon, they were ready to depart. Margaret's wagon was loaded with supplies, blankets arranged in the back to make Naomi as comfortable as possible. Ruth and Hannah would ride with them, while Reuben, Amos, Parker, and Daniel would ride alongside on horseback. As they prepared to leave, Margaret handed Reuben a revolver, an old Army Colt, well-maintained. It was Thomas's, she said. He'd want it used in a just cause. Reuben accepted the weapon with proper solemnity. Thank you for everything. They set out under a clear sky, following a trail that Margaret assured them would keep them concealed for most of the journey to the trading post. If all went well, they would reach Fort Laramie by the following evening. But as Reuben had learned repeatedly over the past week, things rarely went as planned when Ezekiel Blackwood was involved. They reached the trading post by dusk, a collection of log buildings surrounding a central yard, where a handful of horses were hitched and men gathered around a fire pit. A sign identified the largest structure as Miller's Trading and Medical, while a smaller building bore the simple designation Saloon. Stay with the wagon, Parker instructed, dismounting. Daniel and I will scout the place first. Make sure it's safe. Reuben nodded, positioning himself between the wagon and the trading post, hand resting on his borrowed revolver. The past days had taught him caution, perhaps too well. Parker and Daniel returned quickly, their expressions grim. Problem, Parker said without preamble. McCready's inside the trading post. 3 of his men, too. How? Reuben asked, dismayed. Daniel said they were heading east. Must have realized their mistake and circled back, Parker surmised. They're questioning the doctor now, showing him sketches of us. We should bypass the trading post, Daniel suggested. Continue to Fort Laramie. Reuben glanced at the wagon where Naomi lay pale and exhausted despite Margaret's care. She needs a doctor. Real medicine. She needs to stay alive, Parker countered. If McCready catches us here, none of us will reach Fort Laramie. Margaret, who had been listening silently, spoke up. I'll go in. McCready doesn't know me. Too risky, Reuben said immediately. I'm an old woman seeking supplies. Nothing suspicious about that. Margaret's expression was determined. I can get what Naomi needs without raising any alarms. Before anyone could object further, she climbed down from the wagon. Keep the children out of sight. I won't be long. They watched anxiously as Margaret walked toward the trading post, her posture straight, pace unhurried. She disappeared inside, leaving them to wait in tense silence. Minutes stretched interminably. Ruth fidgeted, Hannah stared fixedly at the trading post door, and Amos gripped his rifle with white-knuckled intensity. Naomi drifted in and out of consciousness, her fever returning despite Margaret's treatments. Finally, after nearly half an hour, Margaret emerged, a small parcel tucked under her arm. She walked toward them with the same measured pace, giving no indication of trouble. We need to leave, she said upon reaching the wagon. Now. McCready's offering $200 for information on our whereabouts. The doctor's an honest man, but money talks in these parts. They continued northward immediately, bypassing the main trail to Fort Laramie in favor of a less traveled route that Daniel knew. As darkness fell, they made camp in a dense thicket, risking only the smallest fire to heat water for Margaret's medicines. What did you learn at the trading post? Reuben asked as she tended to Naomi. McCready has 15 men with him, Margaret replied, mixing powdered herbs into hot water. They've been searching for 3 days, covering every trail and questioning everyone they meet. In Blackwood? Arrived at the trading post yesterday, left for Fort Laramie this morning. Reuben exchanged alarmed glances with Parker. He's going directly to Colonel Harrison. To discredit us before we can present our evidence, Parker agreed grimly. Smart move. Can we reach Fort Laramie before Blackwood's influence takes hold? Rubin asked. Possibly, but we'll need to travel through the night. Parker looked dubious. With the wagon and wounded, it won't be easy. We don't have a choice, Rubin said. If Harrison sides with Blackwood, our evidence becomes worthless. After a brief rest, they continued their journey by moonlight, Daniel guiding them along paths that even Parker didn't know existed. The children slept in the wagon, nestled beside Naomi, whose condition stabilized somewhat thanks to Margaret's medicines. Dawn found them still traveling, exhausted but determined. Fort Laramie appeared on the horizon around mid-morning, an impressive compound of wooden buildings surrounded by a tall palisade, the American flag flying above its gates. We made it, Rubin breathed, relief washing over him. Don't celebrate yet, Parker cautioned. Getting in is one thing, getting Harrison to listen is another. They approached the fort openly, no longer attempting concealment. As they neared the gates, a sentry called out for them to identify themselves. Josiah Parker, Parker replied, former captain, Union Army, requesting audience with Colonel Harrison on urgent business. The sentry conferred briefly with another soldier, then nodded. The colonel's expecting you, sir. The gates swung open, revealing the fort's bustling interior. Soldiers drilling on the parade ground, wagons loaded with supplies, civilians moving among the various buildings. They were directed to the headquarters, a large two-story structure at the far end of the compound. As they approached, Rubin noticed a familiar horse hitched outside, a large black stallion with distinctive white socks. Blackwood's mount. He's already here, Rubin muttered to Parker. Expected, Parker replied. Stay focused on the evidence. That's our only advantage. They were shown into an antechamber and told to wait. Through a partially open door, Rubin could hear voices from the adjacent office, one calm and authoritative, the other immediately recognizable as Blackwood's. Dangerous criminal element, Colonel, Blackwood was saying. The man Kane has a history of making false accusations against public officials. Was run out of redemption for similar slander. I understand your concern, Mayor, the colonel replied, his tone measured. Rest assured, if these individuals appear at Fort Laramie, they will be thoroughly questioned. They're not just criminals, they're murderers, Blackwood pressed. Responsible for the death of Pastor Johnson, a respected community leader, and several soldiers under Lieutenant Wallace's command. Serious charges. Do you have evidence to support them? I have eyewitness testimony and official warrants from the territorial governor himself. The door opened fully, revealing Colonel Harrison, a tall, distinguished man in his 50s with a neatly trimmed beard and the ramrod posture of a career officer. Beside him stood Blackwood, impeccably dressed as always, though strain showed around his eyes. Blackwood froze at the sight of them, momentary shock quickly replaced by calculated composure. Well, he said, voice dripping with false concern. The fugitives themselves, how convenient. Harrison surveyed the group, Rubin and Parker at the forefront, Daniel standing slightly apart. Margaret and the children clustered around the wagon where Naomi lay. His expression revealed nothing of his thoughts. Captain Parker, he acknowledged with a nod. It's been some time. Colonel, Parker replied, we bring evidence of crimes committed by Mayor Blackwood, corruption, extortion, and treason during the war. Blackwood laughed, the sound brittle with tension. Preposterous. Colonel, these people are desperate criminals attempting to avoid justice through wild accusations. Harrison's gaze shifted to Rubin. You would be Mr. Kane, I presume? Yes, sir. Mayor Blackwood has serious charges against you, sir. Murder, insurrection, fleeing lawful authorities. False charges, Colonel, Rubin replied steadily, manufactured to silence witnesses to Blackwood's crimes. So you claim. Harrison stepped forward, examining Naomi in the wagon. And this would be the woman allegedly whipped on the mayor's orders? Not allegedly, Margaret said sharply. I've treated her wounds myself, 100 lashes, delivered with the intent to kill. Harrison's expression softened slightly at the sight of Naomi's condition. I see. He straightened, addressing them all. This is a complex situation with accusations on both sides. As the ranking military authority in this district, it falls to me to determine the truth. There's no complexity here, Colonel. Blackwood interjected. These people are fugitives from territorial justice. Your duty is clear. My duty, Mayor Blackwood, is to the United States government and the rule of law. Harrison's tone cooled noticeably. I will review all evidence and testimony before making any determination. We have documents, Rubin said, nodding to Amos, who still guarded the leather pouch. In Blackwood's own handwriting, detailing his crimes during and after the war. Forgeries, Blackwood dismissed, created to slander me. We also have witness testimony, Parker added, from Pastor Johnson before his murder, from Sarah Winters, who works in Blackwood's house, from Wade Lockett, who died helping us escape. Blackwood's composure slipped momentarily at the mention of Lockett. Wade was killed by these criminals, Colonel. Another murder to add to their charges. That's a lie, Rubin said, anger rising. Lockett died defending us after learning the truth about what you did to his wife. Harrison raised a hand for silence. Enough. This gets us nowhere. He turned to an aide. Lieutenant, escort Mayor Blackwood to the officers' quarters. See that he's comfortable, but remains on the premises. Colonel, you can't possibly, Blackwood began. I can and I will, Mayor, Harrison interrupted firmly. Until this matter is resolved, both you and these civilians will remain at Fort Laramie under military supervision. As Blackwood was led away, his face darkened with barely controlled fury. This isn't over, Kane, he called back. Not by a long shot. Harrison turned to another aide. See that the wounded woman receives medical attention immediately. The children as well. To Rubin and Parker, he said, you two, with me. Bring your evidence. In Harrison's office, Rubin and Parker presented everything they had. Blackwood's documents, Pastor Johnson's journal, their own testimony about events in Hollow Creek. The colonel listened without interruption, examining each piece of evidence with meticulous care. If these documents are authentic, he said finally, they represent the most serious breach of military conduct I've encountered since the war. They're authentic, Rubin assured him. You can verify Blackwood's handwriting against official records. I intend to, Harrison replied, along with interviewing each of you separately to ensure consistency in your accounts. And in the meantime, Parker asked? In the meantime, you will all remain under the protection of the United States Army. Harrison's expression was grave but not unsympathetic. Your children will be safe here, Mr. Kane. You have my word on that. The next 3 days passed in a blur of interviews, examinations, and waiting. Naomi received proper medical care, her condition stabilizing under the fort doctor's attention. The children were given clean clothes, regular meals, and a safe place to sleep, luxuries they hadn't known in weeks. Blackwood remained confined to the officers' quarters, though Rubin often felt the mayor's cold gaze following him across the parade ground. The man's influence was evident in the deference some officers showed him, the whispered conversations that stopped when Rubin approached. On the 4th day, Colonel Harrison summoned Rubin to his office. Parker was already there, along with a civilian Rubin didn't recognize, a sharp-eyed man in an expensive suit. Mr. Kane, Harrison greeted him, allow me to introduce Mr. Lawrence Drummond, federal prosecutor from the Department of Justice. Rubin shook the man's hand, hope rising in his chest. The involvement of a federal prosecutor suggested Harrison was taking their evidence seriously. Mr. Drummond arrived from Cheyenne this morning, Harrison explained. I've briefed him on the situation and shown him the evidence you provided. And I must say, Drummond added, it's the most comprehensive documentation of corruption I've seen in my career. Mayor Blackwood appears to have been quite meticulous in recording his crimes. Pride, Parker commented, the downfall of men like him. Indeed. Drummond consulted a notebook. We've confirmed the authenticity of the documents through handwriting analysis and cross-reference with military records. The evidence of wartime profiteering alone is sufficient for a federal case. Then you're arresting Blackwood? Rubin asked. I signed the warrant an hour ago, Drummond confirmed. Colonel Harrison's men are executing it as we speak. As if on cue, a commotion erupted outside, shouting, running feet. Harrison moved to the window, his expression changing from curiosity to alarm. Damn it, he muttered. Blackwood's escaped. They rushed outside to find the fort in chaos. A soldier lay unconscious near the officers' quarters, another nursing a bleeding head wound. The gates stood open, several horses missing from the stable. He had help, Parker said grimly, surveying the scene. Inside help. Harrison's face flushed with anger. Lieutenant Morris, he barked to a nearby officer, assemble a pursuit party immediately. 10 men, best riders, and find out who aided this escape. I want them in chains by nightfall. Yes, sir, Morris saluted, hurrying away. He'll head for Hollow Creek, Reuben predicted, his power base, where he has men loyal to him. And hostages, Parker added. Sarah Winters, other witnesses. Drummond looked troubled. If Blackwood reaches Hollow Creek before we apprehend him, he could destroy additional evidence, intimidate witnesses, even flee across the territorial border. I'm going after him, Reuben decided. Don't be foolish, Harrison objected. My men will handle this. Your men don't know Hollow Creek. They don't know Blackwood like I do. Reuben's mind was made up. I'm going, with or without your blessing. Harrison studied him for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. Very well, but not alone. I'll provide an escort, official military authority to counter whatever resistance Blackwood musters. I'm coming too, Parker said. Unfinished business. And me, Daniel added, appearing silently beside them. Harrison looked like he might object to Daniel's inclusion, but thought better of it. Fine, you leave in 30 minutes. Lieutenant Morris will command the military contingent. Reuben found Naomi in the infirmary, sitting up for the first time in days. Her back would bear scars for life, but the doctor had declared her out of danger. You're going after him, she said as soon as she saw his face. Not a question. He escaped, heading for Hollow Creek most likely. She nodded, unsurprised. I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. You're barely recovered. Those are my people in Hollow Creek, Reuben. People who suffered under Blackwood because I wasn't strong enough to stand against him before. Her eyes held a determination he recognized all too well. I won't abandon them now. Naomi, don't argue, she cut him off. You know I'm right. Before he could respond, the children burst into the infirmary, having already heard the news of Blackwood's escape. Amos's face was set with the same determination he had shown in the cave. We're going too, he declared. No, Reuben said firmly. You're staying here where it's safe. We've come this far together, Amos argued. You said it yourself. Family stays together. This is different, Reuben insisted. Blackwood is desperate now, more dangerous than ever. He'll kill you if he gets the chance, Ruth said, her small voice trembling. Like he tried to kill Miss Clark. Hannah stepped forward, taking her father's hand. To his astonishment, she spoke again, her second sentence in 3 years. Don't leave us behind, please. The simple plea struck Reuben to the core. These past weeks had forged them into something stronger than they'd been before. Not just a broken family surviving, but a united one fighting for something that mattered. They'll be safer here, Naomi said gently, understanding his conflict. Will they? Reuben wasn't so sure. Blackwood had help escaping. Who's to say he doesn't have more allies inside the fort? The logic was undeniable. Separated, they were vulnerable. Together, they had a chance. All right, he conceded, but you stay with the main force, well behind the advance party. If there's any fighting, you remain with the soldiers. Understood? The children nodded solemnly, even Amos accepting these terms without argument. 30 minutes later, they rode out, a force of 15, including 10 soldiers under Lieutenant Morris, Reuben, Parker, Daniel, Naomi, against doctor's orders, and the 3 Kane children. Margaret O'Brien insisted on joining them as well, her medical skills potentially valuable in the coming confrontation. They rode hard through the day, making camp only when darkness made further progress impossible. By Reuben's calculation, Blackwood was several hours ahead of them, but burdened by fewer riders and less urgency now that he'd escaped immediate capture. Around the campfire that night, Lieutenant Morris outlined their approach. We'll reach Hollow Creek by midday tomorrow. My men will secure the perimeter while you, Mr. Kane, attempt to locate witnesses and evidence. Blackwood will have his supporters rallied by then, Parker cautioned. Could be walking into an ambush. We represent federal authority, Morris replied. Any resistance will constitute insurrection against the United States government. I'm sure that will be a great comfort when we're being shot at, Parker remarked dryly. Morris ignored the comment, continuing with his briefing. The military precision of the plan was reassuring, but Reuben couldn't shake the feeling that Blackwood had one final move to play, one last desperate gambit to escape justice. Later, as the camp settled into sleep, Naomi found Reuben sitting alone at the edge of the firelight. She settled beside him, her movements still careful but stronger than they had been. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That it's not over yet," he replied, staring into the darkness. "Blackwood's too calculating to run without a plan. Whatever he's planning, we'll face it together." She placed her hand over his. "All of us." Reuben turned to her, seeing in her face everything that had changed since he'd found her by the river, the strength that had always been there, now unbowed by suffering or fear. "When this is over," he said quietly, "if we survive it." "When we survive it," she corrected with a small smile. "When we survive it," he amended, "we should talk about the future." "Our future?" The question held both hope and caution. "Yes." Reuben glanced toward where his children slept, Hannah's wooden eagle clutched in Ruth's small hand. "All of us." Naomi's fingers tightened around his. "I'd like that." They sat in companionable silence, drawing strength from each other's presence. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation with Blackwood, the culmination of everything they had endured. But for this moment, there was peace in the simple acknowledgement of possibilities yet to come. Hollow Creek appeared unchanged as they approached the following day. The same neat buildings surrounding the central square, the white church steeple piercing the blue sky. Only the unusual stillness suggested anything amiss. "Too quiet," Daniel observed as they halted just outside town. "No people, no movement." Lieutenant Morris deployed his men in a wide perimeter, instructing them to prevent anyone from leaving town. With Reuben, Parker, and Daniel, he advanced cautiously toward the square, while Naomi, the children, and Margaret remained with the rear guard. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of their horses' hooves on the packed earth. Windows were shuttered, doors closed. Even the saloon, usually busy at midday, stood deserted. "Where is everyone?" Morris muttered, hand resting on his revolver. They reached the square, dismounting near the church. The building that had once been Pastor Johnson's sanctuary now seemed abandoned, its doors hanging partially open. "Blackwood's house," Reuben said, pointing to the imposing structure at the far end of the square. "That's where we'll find him." As they approached the mayor's residence, the front door opened. Sarah Winters emerged, her face pale but composed. Behind her stood Blackwood himself, one hand gripping her arm, the other holding a revolver to her head. "That's far enough," he called. "Any closer and she dies." They halted immediately. Morris stepped forward, his uniform lending authority to his voice. "Ezekiel Blackwood, you are under arrest by order of the United States government for crimes including treason, extortion, and murder. Release the woman and surrender yourself." Blackwood laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "I think not, Lieutenant. I still hold considerable influence in this territory." He gestured with his gun toward the surrounding buildings. "My men are positioned throughout the town. One word from me, and they open fire." Reuben scanned the buildings, noting the occasional glint of sunlight on metal, rifle barrels positioned at windows and on rooftops. They were surrounded. "It's over, Blackwood," Reuben said, keeping his voice steady. "Your documents have been verified. Federal prosecutors are building a case against you. Even if you kill us all, you can't escape justice now." "Perhaps not," Blackwood conceded, "but I can ensure none of you live to see it done." His grip tightened on Sarah, making her wince. "Now here's what's going to happen. My horse is saddled behind this house. I'm going to leave with Mrs. Winters as insurance. Once I'm safely away, I'll release her." "You're not leaving," Morris stated flatly. "My men have the town surrounded." "Your men are outnumbered and outpositioned," Blackwood retorted. "Do you really want to test their loyalty against men who fought alongside each other for years?" The standoff stretched, tension building with each passing second. Reuben knew Blackwood was desperate, and desperate men were unpredictable. If shooting started, many would die, including potentially his own children. "Wait!" came a voice from behind them. Naomi, ignoring Reuben's instructions, had advanced into the square. She walked forward slowly, hands raised to show she carried no weapon. "Ms. Clark," Blackwood acknowledged, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "Recovered from your punishment, I see. Though I hear you'll carry the scars for life." "Let Sarah go," Naomi said, ignoring his taunt. "Take me instead." "Naomi, no!" Reuben moved to intercept her, but Parker held him back. "Wait," Parker murmured. "Look." While attention focused on Naomi, Daniel had vanished. Reuben spotted him a moment later, scaling the side of a building adjacent to Blackwood's house with silent efficiency. "Why would I want you?" Blackwood was asking Naomi. "You're the reason for all this trouble." "Because I'm the witness you fear most," she replied, still advancing slowly. "The one who knows what really happened to James, what you did during the war, how you built your empire on suffering." Blackwood's expression darkened. "You always were too clever for your own good, Naomi. Should have killed you myself instead of leaving it to the river." "Many things you should have done differently," she agreed, now within 20 feet of him. "But your pride wouldn't allow it." "Enough talk," Blackwood snapped. "Stay back or she dies." Naomi stopped but kept Blackwood's attention focused on her. "The town knows the truth now, Ezekiel. That's why they're hiding in their homes, not supporting you, hiding from you. Your power is gone." Doubt flickered briefly across Blackwood's face as he scanned the empty square. In that moment of distraction, Daniel made his move, dropping silently from the roof onto the porch behind Blackwood. What happened next unfolded with breathtaking speed. Daniel's arm locked around Blackwood's throat, wrenching him backward. Sarah broke free, running toward Naomi, who pulled her to safety. Blackwood fired wildly, his bullet striking the ground harmlessly. The shot triggered an immediate response. Gunfire erupted from several buildings, not directed at Reuben and the soldiers as feared, but at Blackwood's house. Windows shattered, wood splintered as bullets found their marks. The townspeople, Parker realized. "They're firing on Blackwood's men." Lieutenant Morris seized the opportunity, shouting orders to his soldiers who moved quickly to secure the area. Reuben ran to Naomi and Sarah, shielding them as best he could from the gunfire. On the porch, Daniel and Blackwood struggled for control of the revolver. A shot rang out, and both men fell. Reuben's heart seized, fearing the worst, but Daniel rolled clear, blood streaming from a grazing wound to his shoulder. Blackwood lay still, the bullet meant for Daniel having found the mayor's chest instead. His eyes were open, staring skyward in shock as blood spread across his immaculate shirt. The shooting died away as quickly as it had begun. From the surrounding buildings, people emerged cautiously, shopkeepers, farmers, ordinary citizens of Hollow Creek. They gathered in the square, keeping a respectful distance from the fallen mayor and the soldiers now securing his men. Reuben approached Blackwood, kneeling beside him. The man was still alive, breath coming in wet, labored gasps. "You lost everything for her," Blackwood managed, blood bubbling at his lips. "Was it worth it?" Reuben looked up, finding Naomi with his gaze. Beyond her, his children had appeared with Margaret, running toward him across the square. Hannah's face alight with rare joy. Ruth bouncing with excitement, Amos walking tall with pride rather than burdened by responsibility. "Yes," Reuben answered truthfully. "It was worth everything." Blackwood's eyes clouded with incomprehension, then emptiness. The architect of so much suffering died as he had lived, unable to understand the values that had ultimately defeated him. The townspeople drew closer, Sarah Winters stepping forward as their representative. "We heard the shooting at the mines," she explained. "Word spread that Lockett had turned against the mayor, that there was evidence of Blackwood's crimes. People started talking, comparing stories. When Blackwood returned this morning, raving about federal agents and arrests, we knew which side to choose." "Justice," Naomi said softly. "At last." The children reached Reuben, throwing themselves into his embrace. Hannah looked at the fallen Blackwood without fear, then at Daniel, who was having his wound tended by Margaret. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice still new and tentative, but growing stronger. "Yes," Reuben assured her, holding his family close. "It's over. We can go home now." "But we don't have a home," Ruth pointed out with a child's practicality. "It burned down." Naomi joined them, her hand finding Reuben's. "We'll build a new one," she said, together. Around them, Hollow Creek stirred with renewed life, doors opening, voices rising in conversation rather than fear. Lieutenant Morris organized the arrest of Blackwood's remaining men, while Prosecutor Drummond, who had arrived with reinforcements just after the shooting, began collecting statements from townspeople eager to testify about Blackwood's reign. "What happens now?" Amos asked, watching the activity with interest. "Now," Reuben said, "we keep our promise. Justice for everyone. Blackwood hurt. Then we start again." He looked at his children, at Naomi, at the friends who had fought alongside them, Parker, Daniel, Margaret, not just surviving, living. The sun was high over Hollow Creek, illuminating a town awakening from a long nightmare. There would be challenges ahead, rebuilding, healing, creating a new order to replace the corrupted one. But for the first time since Margaret's death, Reuben felt something beyond duty or determination. Hope, pure and undeniable. Hannah looked up at him, then at Naomi, her solemn eyes holding a wisdom beyond her years. Family, she said simply, encompassing them all in that single perfect word. And so it was, the end.